Tonight, in front of the entire pack, Naira Voss, a mute Omega branded defective, will be publicly rejected by her promised alpha. But what she doesn't know, Emperor Draven Kalor, the kingdom's most dangerous man, is watching from his throne. And when she saves his life from death's edge, raises his secret child, then refuses to surrender either when the royal council comes to take them, she ignites a war that will shatter every hierarchy. This is the story of the girl they threw away, who rose to become the storm they never saw coming. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from. The great hall stank of power and desperation. Naira could smell it beneath the expensive perfumes and the polished marble, the sharp tang of fear wrapped in silk, ambition dressed as tradition. The chandeliers overhead dripped with crystal and firelight, casting everything in that particular golden glow the alphas loved, the kind that made them look like gods instead of what they really were, predators in expensive clothes. She stood in the shadow at the far edge of the room, where the light didn't quite reach, where the forgotten Omegas always stood. Her hands were folded in front of her, steady despite the tremor that wanted to crawl up her spine and nest in her throat. But her throat was already occupied by years of silence, so there was no room for fear there anymore. Tonight was the choosing. Around her, Omegas preened and postured, their voices like honey and wind chimes, everything designed to attract, to seduce, to secure. They wore gowns that cost more than Naira had seen in her entire life, jewelry that caught the light and threw it back like weapons. Their laughter was practiced. Their smiles were currency. Naira wore gray, plain, simple gray that her aunt had given her with a look that said, "This is all you deserve and more than you've earned." She didn't mind. Gray meant invisible, and invisible meant safe. Except tonight, she wasn't supposed to be invisible. Tonight, she was supposed to be claimed. "Look at her," someone whispered, close enough that Naira could feel the breath against her ear. Standing there like she actually believes Kalen Virex will go through with it. Laughter, soft and vicious. "I heard his mother tried to buy out the contract, offered triple the bride price just to get him out of it. Can you blame her? Imagine having a mute Omega as your son's mate. The shame of it." Naira's fingers tightened against each other, nails digging into skin, but her face remained smooth, empty. She'd learned early that reaction was permission, permission to dig deeper, to twist harder, to find the soft places and press until something broke. She wouldn't give them that. Not tonight. Not ever. The hall's energy shifted like a sudden wind, and Naira felt it before she saw it. The way bodies turned, the way voices dropped and then rose again in that particular pitch of excitement and hunger. The alphas were entering. They came in a wave of dark suits and darker eyes, moving through the crowd like sharks through water. Each one carried themselves with that specific arrogance that came from being born at the top of the hierarchy, from never having to question whether they deserved the air they breathed or the space they occupied. Naira's eyes found Kalen Virex almost immediately, not because she wanted to, but because her body had been trained to track him for 3 years of an engagement she'd never asked for, but couldn't escape. He was beautiful in the way knives are beautiful, all sharp lines and cold edges, dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from ice and cruelty. 26 years old, and already the head of the Virex pack, already considered one of the rising powers in the kingdom's complex web of alpha politics. And for 3 years, he'd been promised to her. A contract signed when she was 15 and he was 18, before anyone knew her voice wouldn't come back, before the fever that had stolen her speech and left her branded as broken, defective. Less. Kalen's eyes swept the room, and for just a heartbeat, they landed on her. No warmth, no recognition, just cold assessment, like looking at a piece of furniture he'd been told he had to keep but had no use for. Then his gaze moved on, and Naira felt something in her chest crack just slightly, the way ice cracks before it breaks. "Omegas of the Lunar Court," a voice boomed from the front of the hall, and Naira recognized Elder Thorn, his white beard trembling with self-importance as he spread his arms wide. "Tonight, we gather for the sacred choosing, where bonds are formed and futures are secured. Let the alphas step forward and claim what is theirs by right and desire." The hall erupted in applause. Naira watched as, one by one, alphas moved forward. They were practiced at this, each approach choreographed for maximum impact. They'd circle their chosen Omega, let the scent of their pheromones fill the air, make a show of the claim before finally speaking the words that would seal the bond. I claim Sarah Thane as my mate and Omega. I claim Lyris Cove as my mate and Omega. I claim each declaration was met with cheers, with celebration, with the bright, sharp satisfaction of watching the hierarchy reinforce itself one bond at a time. Naira counted them. 12 Omegas claimed, 15, 20. The crowd around her thinned as each Omega was pulled into the light, into waiting arms, into futures that were secure if not necessarily happy. And still Kalen Virex stood at the front of the room, talking to another alpha, laughing at something, his posture loose and easy like he had all the time in the world, like there wasn't an Omega waiting for him in the shadows. He's not going to do it, the voice came again, that same whisper carrier from before. Oh gods, he's really not going to do it. He's going to reject her right here in front of everyone. Shut up, Nira thought, but of course she couldn't say it, could only stand there with her hands folded and her face empty while the whispers built around her like a storm gathering strength. The number of unclaimed Omegas dwindled. 30, 35, until there were only 3 left standing in the shadows. Then 2, then just Naira. The hall had gone quieter now, the easy celebrations fading into something else, something anticipatory and hungry in a different way. This was the part they'd all been waiting for, Naira realized, with a cold settling in her stomach. This was the entertainment. Elder Thorn cleared his throat, and the sound echoed in the sudden silence. Kalen Virex, he called out, and his voice carried weight, formality, the power of tradition behind every syllable. You are bound by contract to the Omega Niravos. Step forward and claim what is yours. The silence stretched. Kalen turned slowly from his conversation, and Naira watched something flicker across his face, annoyance maybe, or resignation. He looked at Elder Thorn, then at his mother standing near the front row, her face tight with what might have been embarrassment or anger or both. Then he looked at Naira. Their eyes met across the distance of the hall, and Naira felt her heart slam against her ribs once, hard enough to hurt. Please, she thought, and hated herself for thinking it. Please just get it over with. Claim me or don't, but don't drag this out. Don't make this worse than it has to be. Kalen started walking, not toward her, toward the center of the hall where everyone could see him, where his voice would carry to every corner of the massive space. He moved with purpose now, each step measured and deliberate, and Naira felt the cold in her stomach spread outward, through her limbs, into her fingers and toes, until she wondered if she'd ever feel warm again. I have something to say, Kalen announced, his voice clear and strong and absolutely devoid of anything resembling doubt. About this contract. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Kalen's mother stood up, her hand reaching out as if to stop him, but he shook his head once, sharp and final. 3 years ago, my father, may he rest in power, signed a contract binding me to Naira Voss. He paused, letting the name hang in the air like something distasteful. At the time, she was considered acceptable. Unremarkable, but acceptable. Naira's nails cut into her palms. But circumstances have changed. Kalen's voice hardened. The Omega I was promised no longer exists. What stands here now is defective, broken, a mute who cannot fulfill even the most basic duties of an Omega. She cannot speak for her Alpha, cannot negotiate, cannot represent our pack with the dignity and grace required. Someone in the crowd laughed, quickly stifled. Kalen smiled, and it was the cruelest thing Naira had ever seen. So tonight, in front of this assembled court, in front of witnesses and under the eyes of our ancestors, I invoke my right of rejection. His eyes found Naira's across the distance, and he didn't look away. I, Kalen Virex, Alpha of the Virex pack, reject Naira Voss as my mate. The contract is void. The bond is refused. The words hit like physical blows. Naira felt her knees want to buckle, felt the floor tilt underneath her feet, but she locked her legs and kept standing because falling would be worse. Falling would confirm everything he'd just said, would prove that she was weak, broken, less. The hall exploded, not with shock or outrage, with laughter, with relief, with the savage satisfaction of watching someone fall from a height they were never supposed to reach in the first place. Finally, someone said, loud enough to be heard, someone had the balls to say what we were all thinking. Poor thing. Imagine thinking you could actually... She can't even defend herself, can't even speak. What kind of Omega... The voices blurred together, a wall of sound that pressed against Naira from all sides, and she stood in the center of it, in her gray dress, with her folded hands and her empty face, and she felt something inside her chest go very, very still. Not breaking, dying. The part of her that had hoped, despite everything, that maybe Kaylin would surprise her, that maybe the contract would be enough, that maybe she wasn't as worthless as everyone said. That part died quietly, without ceremony, and left something colder in its place. Kaylin was still talking, playing to the crowd now, his posture loose and confident. "I'll pay whatever penalty the contract requires," he said, waving one hand dismissively. "Triple it even, but I will not shackle myself to damaged goods. The Virex pack deserves better. I deserve better." More applause, more agreement. Nira's aunt materialized at her elbow, fingers digging into her arm like claws. "Come on," she hissed, her face twisted with humiliation. "Get out of here before you embarrass us further. Move!" But Naira couldn't move, because something impossible was happening. In the balcony above the main hall, where the throne sat, massive and ancient and carved from black stone that seemed to swallow light, a figure stood. Emperor Draven Kalor. Nira had only seen him once before, years ago at a distance, but there was no mistaking him. He was taller than any alpha in the room, broader through the shoulders, with silver eyes that caught the light like metal, and long dark hair shot through with gray at the temples despite being barely 35. He wore black, simple and unadorned except for the silver chain of office across his chest, and he stood perfectly still, watching the scene below with an expression Naira couldn't read. But his eyes were locked on her. Not on Kaylin, not on the crowd, on her. Naira felt the weight of that gaze like a physical thing, heavy and searching, and for just a moment, one single heartbeat, something sparked in the frozen wasteland of her chest. Then the Emperor turned away, disappearing back into the shadows of the throne room, and the moment shattered. "I said, move!" her aunt snarled, yanking hard enough that Naira stumbled. And finally, she did. She turned and walked toward the side exit, toward the servants' passages that the Omegas used when they didn't want to be seen. And behind her the hall erupted in celebration, the choosing continuing without her like she'd never been there at all. The laughter followed her all the way to the door. Twam. Naira's cottage sat at the very edge of the pack territory, where the manicured grounds gave way to wild forest and the streetlights stopped pretending to reach. It wasn't really hers. It belonged to the pack, to the collective property that housed the lower-ranking members and the charity cases. But Naira had lived here alone for 2 years, ever since her aunt made it clear that having a defective niece in her house was bad for her social standing. The cottage was small and cold, and the roof leaked when it rained, but it was quiet, and after tonight, quiet was all Naira wanted. She pushed through the door and locked it behind her, then stood in the darkness for a long moment, just breathing. In, out, in, out. The gray dress felt too tight suddenly, like it was choking her, and Naira yanked at the buttons with shaking fingers until they gave way and she could step out of it, leaving it in a heap on the floor. She should feel something, she thought distantly. Anger, grief, humiliation. But there was only the cold spreading through her like frost, freezing everything it touched until even feeling seemed too far away to reach. Naira walked to the bathroom and turned on the shower, not bothering to wait for the water to heat. She stepped under the spray and let it hammer against her skin, ice cold and brutal, and she pressed her forehead against the tile and finally let herself shake. Not crying. She was done crying. But her body needed to expel the poison somehow, so she shook and shook until her muscles went rigid and her teeth chattered, and the cold from the water met the cold in her chest, and she couldn't tell them apart anymore. When she finally stepped out, the sky outside had gone dark. Naira dried off mechanically, pulled on old clothes that smelled like soap and solitude, and walked to the kitchen. She should eat. That's what functioning people did. They ate and slept and continued existing even when existing felt like punishment. But the thought of food made her stomach turn. Instead, she made tea. Chamomile from the garden she kept out back, the one thing she'd managed to grow successfully in this rocky soil. She was pouring the hot water when she heard it, a sound from outside. Low and rough and wrong. Naira froze, the kettle still in her hand. There it was again, a scraping, dragging sound like something heavy being pulled across the ground, then a sound that stopped her heart. A cry. High and thin and unmistakably infant. Nira set the kettle down with shaking hands and moved to the window. The cottage backed up to the forest, to the wild places where pack members were warned not to go after dark because the treaties with the feral packs were old and complicated and easily broken. She couldn't see anything in the darkness. But the cry came again, more insistent now, tinged with distress. Not your problem, Nira told herself firmly. Call the pack security. Let them handle it. Stay inside where it's safe. The crying intensified, joined now by another sound, a wet, rattling breath that spoke of pain and approaching death. Nira's hand was on the door before she'd made the conscious decision to move. She grabbed the flashlight from the shelf, old and heavy, good for hitting things if necessary, and stepped out into the night. The air was cold and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and earth and something else, something metallic and wrong. Blood. Nira followed the sounds, her flashlight cutting through the darkness in short, jerky arcs. 20 feet from her cottage, right at the edge where her property met the forest, she found them. The beast was massive, easily the size of a horse, its fur black as midnight and matted with blood that looked almost purple in the flashlight's beam. It lay on its side, breathing in great labored gasps, and even in obvious agony it radiated power, the kind of primal strength that made every instinct in Nira's body scream, "Predator, run, run!" But she didn't run. Because next to the beast, wrapped in what looked like a torn piece of expensive cloth, was a baby. Newborn, maybe hours old, with a face scrunched up and red from crying and tiny fists waving in the air like it was fighting the entire world. Nira's breath caught. The beast's eye, silver, she noticed, with a distant part of her brain, bright silver, rolled toward her, watching, assessing. Then, impossibly, it shifted. Just slightly, just enough to push the crying infant toward Nira with one massive paw. The gesture was clear. Take her. Save her. Nira dropped to her knees. Up close, the beast was even more terrifying, scarred and battle-worn, with teeth the length of Nira's fingers and claws that could tear through steel. But its movements around the baby were gentle, careful, protective. And it was dying. Nira could see at least 3 major wounds, a deep gash across its ribs, something that looked like a spear wound in its shoulder, and a slice across its hind leg that had severed muscle and tendon. Too much damage, too much blood loss. No one could survive this. The beast's eye found hers again, and Nira saw something in that silver gaze that shocked her more than anything else tonight. Intelligence. Not animal cunning, but real, human understanding. Please, that eye said, save her. The baby's crying had reached a fever pitch. Nira made a decision that would change everything. She scooped up the infant, so small, so fragile, wrapped in cloth that her flashlight now revealed was embroidered with silver thread in patterns that looked disturbingly royal. And the baby immediately quieted, tiny fingers grabbing onto Nira's shirt with surprising strength. Then Nira looked at the beast. "I'll take her inside," she said, and her voice came out as barely a whisper because it always did when she managed to force sound through her damaged throat, rough and broken and nothing like it used to be. "But I'm coming back for you. Do you understand? Don't you dare die before I get back." The beast's eye closed once, slowly, in what might have been acknowledgement or resignation or both. Nira ran. She got the baby inside, checked her over quickly, no injuries, just cold and hungry and pissed off about it, and wrapped her in the softest blanket she owned. Then she grabbed every medical supply she had, bandages, antiseptic, needle and thread, herbs from her garden that might help with infection, and ran back out. The beast was still breathing, but shallower now, more irregular. Nira dropped to her knees beside it and started working. She'd learned field medicine from necessity, from being the Omega no one wanted to treat when she got hurt, from having to stitch herself back together more times than she could count. Her hands knew what to do even when her brain was screaming that this was insane, that she couldn't save something this large, this damaged, this other. But she tried anyway. She cleaned the wounds, working as fast as her shaking hands would allow. The beast stayed absolutely still, even when Nira knew the antiseptic must have burned like fire, even when she had to dig out what felt like shrapnel from the shoulder wound. "Stay with me," Nira whispered as she worked, her ruined voice barely audible over the wind. "Come on, stay with me." That baby needs you. She needs... The beast's eye opened again, fixing on her face. And Naira felt something shift, like the air had suddenly become charged with electricity, like reality itself had bent just slightly out of true. Power. Raw and ancient and so strong it made her teeth ache. The beast was using it to stay alive, she realized, burning through whatever reserves it had left to keep its heart beating, to keep breathing, to stay just this side of death long enough for what? Naira didn't know. Didn't have time to figure it out. She stitched and bandaged and whispered nonsense encouragement until her hands were covered in blood and her knees were numb from kneeling on the cold ground. Finally, she sat back. It wasn't enough. She knew it wasn't enough. The beast needed real help, a healer with actual power, not a broken Omega with basic medical supplies and stubborn refusal to quit. But the wounds were closed, at least. The bleeding had stopped, and when Naira pressed her hand against the beast's chest, she could feel its heart still beating, strong and steady, despite everything. "I can't move you," Naira said quietly. "You're too big, but I can keep you warm and I can keep watch, and in the morning I'll figure out..." The beast moved. Slowly, painfully, it hauled itself to its feet. Naira scrambled backward, her heart in her throat, because standing up the creature was even more massive than she'd realized, easily 8 feet at the shoulder, built like violence and power given physical form. But it didn't attack. It just looked at her with those silver eyes, then limped toward her cottage. Naira followed because what else was she going to do? The beast somehow managed to fit through her door, barely, and collapsed in front of her fireplace with a groan that sounded disturbingly human. Naira stood in her own doorway, looking at the scene in front of her, a dying beast that radiated more power than anything she'd ever encountered, a newborn baby wrapped in royal cloth, and her, Naira Voss, the rejected Omega, the defective girl, the one who was supposed to disappear quietly after tonight's humiliation. Instead, she'd just saved something, someone that the universe had clearly tried very hard to kill. From her makeshift cradle of blankets, the baby started crying again. The beast's ear twitched toward the sound, and Naira, standing in the wreckage of her old life with blood on her hands and impossible choices pressing down on her shoulders, started laughing. It came out broken and harsh. Nothing like laughter should sound. But it was real, and it was hers, and it felt like the first honest thing that had happened all night. "Okay," she whispered to the universe, to fate, to whatever force had decided to drop this chaos on her doorstep. "Okay, I'll play." She closed the door, locking out the night and the pack and everything that had happened in that golden hall. Then she picked up the crying baby and sat down next to a creature that should have been impossible, and she started to figure out how to keep them both alive. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the first hints of an approaching storm. And in the throne room of the royal palace, Emperor Draven Kalor stood at his window, looking out into the darkness, one hand pressed against his chest where a bond he'd never acknowledged had just flared to life like lightning in his veins. Somewhere out there, his daughter was crying, and the Omega with the empty eyes and the gray dress was the only thing standing between her and death. He should have claimed Naira right there in the hall, should have stopped Kalen's rejection with a single word, should have announced the bond for what it was. But he hadn't, because announcing it would have put a target on her back, would have made her a pawn in games she wasn't ready to play, would have gotten her killed before she even understood what she'd become to him. So he'd stayed silent. And now his mate, unbonded, unclaimed, but his nonetheless, was out there in the dark with his dying wolf form and his newborn daughter, and he couldn't go to her because the council would notice his absence, would start asking questions he couldn't answer. Not yet. Draven's hand clenched into a fist against the window. "Hold on," he thought, sending the message out into the night like a prayer. "Just hold on until dawn, little Omega. Hold on, and I swear I'll make this right." But in her cottage at the edge of the territory, Naira wasn't thinking about mates or bonds or emperors. She was thinking about how to heat formula for a hungry baby when the creature in front of her fireplace had used up all the wood. She was thinking about whether the bandages would hold through the night. She was thinking about what she would do when morning came and people started asking questions she couldn't answer with her broken voice and her empty hands. She was thinking, for the first time in 3 years, that maybe being forgotten wasn't the worst thing that could happen to a person. Maybe being noticed was worse. Maybe being needed was worse. Maybe having something to protect was the most dangerous thing of all. The baby latched onto the bottle Naira had improvised, drinking with the fierce determination of someone who'd already decided the world owed her and she was going to collect. And Naira, holding this tiny impossible thing while a dying emperor bled out on her floor in wolf form, felt something crack open in her chest. Not breaking this time. Awakening. The storm hit an hour before dawn. Rain lashed against the cottage windows with enough force to rattle the glass, and thunder rolled across the sky like the gods themselves were going to war. Naira had been awake the entire night, monitoring the beast's breathing, checking its wounds, feeding the baby every time she cried. She was running on adrenaline and stubbornness, her eyes gritty with exhaustion, her hands shaking from cold and fatigue. But she didn't stop, couldn't stop, because the moment she stopped, the moment she let herself think too hard about what she was doing, she'd realize how insane this all was, and her brain would probably just shut down entirely. Better to keep moving, keep working, keep both of them alive 1 minute at a time. The beast had been sleeping for the past 2 hours, its breathing deeper and more regular than before. The wounds were holding, no fresh blood seeping through the bandages, and when Naira pressed her ear against its massive rib cage, she could hear a heartbeat that sounded almost strong. Impossible, she thought. Nothing should heal that fast. But then again, nothing about tonight made sense. The baby, Naira had started thinking of her as Aaron, though she had no idea why that name felt right, was asleep in her arms, small fingers curled around Naira's thumb with unconscious trust that made something ache behind Naira's ribs. The storm screamed outside, and Naira sat in the dim firelight, holding a child that wasn't hers and watching a beast that shouldn't exist, and she felt strangely, impossibly at peace. This wasn't her life. Her life had ended tonight in that hall, when Kaylin had stood in front of everyone and declared her worthless. This was something else, something new, something that hadn't been ruined yet. The thunder cracked directly overhead, loud enough to shake the cottage walls, and Aaron startled awake with a cry. "Shh," Naira whispered, rocking her gently. "It's okay, just noise, can't hurt you." The beast's eye opened, that silver gaze finding Naira in the darkness. They looked at each other for a long moment. Then, impossibly, the beast's form began to shimmer. Naira watched, frozen, as the massive wolf creature contracted, bones reshaping with sounds that should have been agonizing, fur receding into skin, until a man lay in front of her fireplace, naked, covered in half-healed wounds that matched exactly the injuries she'd treated, with long dark hair and a face that Naira recognized from coins and official portraits and that one glimpse in the throne room. Emperor Draven Kalor. He was unconscious, his breathing labored, his skin too pale and covered in a sheen of sweat that spoke of fever and pain. But he was alive, and he was in her cottage, and that baby in her arms was the Emperor's daughter. "Oh," Naira whispered, her ruined voice barely making sound. "Oh, fuck." Aaron started crying again, and the storm raged on, and somewhere in the distance, Naira could hear voices calling out, searching, getting closer. And she realized with perfect crystal clarity that she had just made a choice that would either save her or destroy her. There was no middle ground anymore. She looked down at the crying princess in her arms, then at the unconscious emperor on her floor, then at the door where the voices were getting louder, more urgent. And Naira Voss, the rejected Omega, the broken girl, the one who was supposed to disappear, made a decision. She stood up, adjusted her grip on Aaron, and walked to the door. When she opened it, she found 12 royal guards standing in the rain, their hands on their weapons, their eyes wide with something that might have been relief or fear, or both. "We're looking for," the lead guard started. Naira stepped aside, revealing the unconscious emperor on her floor. The guard's face went white. "He's alive," Naira said, her voice coming out as barely a rasp. "Barely. He needs a healer, now." The guards rushed in, moving with military precision, and Naira stepped back, still holding Aaron, and watched as her quiet life shattered into pieces that she'd never be able to put back together. One of the guards, a woman with captain's insignia, turned to Naira. "You saved him," she said, and her voice was full of something complicated. "You saved the Emperor." Naira looked down at the baby in her arms, who had finally stopped crying and was looking up at her with eyes that were turning from newborn blue to silver. "I saved them both," Nira whispered. And in that moment, standing in her broken cottage with rain pouring in through the open door and royal guards filling her space and an emperor bleeding on her floor, Nira felt something inside her chest ignite. Not breaking, not dying, beginning. The captain's eyes dropped to the baby, and Nira watched realization dawn across her face. "Is that—" "Yes," Nira said, her voice stronger now despite its roughness. "And she's not leaving my arms until he wakes up and tells me what the hell is going on." The captain looked like she wanted to argue, opened her mouth to say something about protocol or orders or the chain of command. But something in Nira's eyes stopped her. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the blood still drying on Nira's hands. Maybe it was the way she held that baby like she'd go to war with the entire kingdom before she let anyone take her. "Understood," the captain said quietly. "But you're coming with us. Both of you." Nira looked at the unconscious emperor one more time, at the man who'd watched her rejection from his throne and done nothing, at the creature who'd pushed his daughter toward her in the darkness and trusted her with everything. "Okay," she said, and she stepped out into the storm, carrying a princess, following an emperor, walking away from the only life she'd known and toward something she couldn't even begin to imagine. Behind her, the cottage stood empty, the fire burning low, a gray dress still crumpled on the floor where she'd left it. Evidence of the girl who died tonight, and the first proof of the woman who was about to be born. The royal palace swallowed Nira whole. She'd never been inside before. Omegas of her rank didn't get invitations to the inner sanctum, didn't walk these marble halls with their vaulted ceilings and tapestries that cost more than entire villages. But the guards led her through anyway, moving fast, their boots echoing against stone, while Nira clutched Arin tighter and tried not to look as terrified as she felt. They'd loaded the emperor onto a stretcher, still unconscious, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths that made the guards exchange worried glances when they thought Nira wasn't looking. A healer had been summoned, someone important enough that people scrambled when her name was mentioned, but she hadn't arrived yet. So they moved him to the royal wing, to rooms Nira couldn't even process because her brain was too busy screaming that she didn't belong here, that this was wrong, that any second someone would realize she was just the rejected Omega from the choosing and throw her back out into the rain. But no one did. Instead, they brought her to a sitting room adjacent to the emperor's chambers, all dark wood and leather furniture and a fireplace big enough to stand in, and the captain turned to her with an expression that was trying very hard to be professional and failing. "The healer will want to examine the child," she said. "No." The word came out of Nira before she could think about it, rough and absolute. The captain blinked. "I'm sorry?" "He told me to keep her safe." Nira's arms tightened around Arin, who was making small, fussy sounds against her shoulder. "Until he wakes up and tells me different, she stays with me." "That's not— You can't just—" The captain stopped, visibly wrestling with something. "Do you have any idea who you're holding?" "The emperor's daughter." Nira met her eyes steadily. "Do you have any idea who saved both their lives tonight?" Silence fell like a hammer. One of the other guards shifted, hand moving toward his weapon, and Nira felt her heart slam against her ribs, but she didn't look away, didn't back down, because backing down now would mean losing, and she'd already lost enough for one lifetime. The captain held up one hand, stopping the guard's movement. "Stand down!" Her voice carried command, absolute and final. Then quieter, to Nira. "What's your name?" "Nira Voss." Something flickered across the captain's face. Recognition, maybe. "You were at the choosing tonight." Not a question. Nira said nothing, but her silence was answer enough. "I see." The captain studied her for a long moment. "You understand that keeping the heir to the throne in your arms makes you either very brave or very stupid." "I understand that I pulled an 8-inch piece of shrapnel out of her father's shoulder while he was bleeding out on my floor," Nira said, her ruined voice steady despite its roughness. "I understand that she's been crying for 6 hours, and the only time she stops is when I'm holding her. And I understand that if your emperor trusted me with her life in the forest, then you can trust me with it here." The captain's jaw worked, grinding something unspoken between her teeth. Then unexpectedly, she nodded. "Fine. But you don't leave this room, you don't speak to anyone, and the moment the emperor wakes, I'll do whatever he says, Nira finished. I know my place, Captain. I don't think you do. The words came out soft, almost gentle. But I think you're about to learn it. The captain left, posting 2 guards outside the door, and Nira was alone with a baby princess in rooms that cost more than she'd earn in 10 lifetimes. She sank into one of the leather chairs and finally let herself shake. Arn squirmed against her and Nira adjusted her hold automatically, the motion already becoming familiar after just one night. The baby's eyes were open now, that silver gaze tracking movement with unnerving focus for someone so young. Your father is insane, Nira whispered to her. You know that, right? Completely insane. Who shifts into wolf form while dying? Who drags a newborn through a forest in a thunderstorm? Who? The door to the Emperor's chambers crashed open. Nira was on her feet before she'd processed the movement. Aaron clutched protectively against her chest, every muscle in her body coiled tight. A woman swept in, tall and sharp-edged and carrying a bag that marked her as the healer. She was maybe 50, with gray streaking through dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. Where is he? She demanded. In there. Nira gestured toward the bedchamber with her chin, unwilling to take her arms from around Aaron. Multiple wounds, severe blood loss, fever setting in when we moved him. The healer was already moving, her hands glowing with soft golden light that made Nira's skin prickle with awareness of power being used. Real power, the kind that came from bloodlines and training and natural talent, not the scraps that Nira had scraped together from necessity and stubbornness. You! The healer pointed at Nira without looking. Tell me everything. What were the wounds? What did you do? How long ago? Nira rattled off the information, her voice getting rougher with each sentence but pushing through anyway. The healer listened, asked sharp questions, cursed once under her breath in a language Nira didn't recognize. You stitched him. The healer's eyebrows rose. With what training? None. Just necessity. And he's still alive? Apparently I'm better at necessity than I thought. The healer's mouth twitched, might have been amusement or approval or both. Stay here. Don't let anyone touch that baby until I'm done with him. She disappeared into the bedchamber and Nira heard low voices, the healer's sharp commands mixing with responses from what must have been attendants already in there, preparing the Emperor for treatment. Nira sat back down and tried to breathe. Arn started crying again, a thin wail that spoke of hunger and discomfort, and Nira realized with sinking dread that she had no supplies, no bottles, no formula, nothing that a baby needed. Hey, she murmured, rocking gently. I know you're hungry. Just give me a minute to figure this out, okay? Your dad's kind of monopolizing all the attention right now. I can help with that. Nira's head snapped up. A woman stood in the doorway, younger than the healer, maybe 30, with kind eyes and the practical clothes of a servant. She carried a basket that Nira could see contained bottles and blankets and everything Aaron might need. Captain's orders, the woman explained, moving into the room with the easy confidence of someone who belonged here. She said you'd probably need supplies. I'm Mira, one of the palace nursery attendants. May I? She gestured toward Aaron, and every instinct in Nira's body screamed, no, mine, protect. But Aaron was crying harder now, and Nira's arms were shaking from exhaustion, and she needed help whether she wanted to admit it or not. Show me how to make the bottle, Nira said, instead of handing Aaron over. I'll feed her. Mira's expression softened. Of course. She walked Nira through the process, warmed milk, the right temperature, how to test it against her wrist, and Nira absorbed every detail like her life depended on it. Maybe it did. When Aaron latched onto the bottle, drinking with fierce determination, Mira settled into the chair across from Nira and watched with an expression that was part curiosity, part something else. So you're the one who saved them, she said quietly. I'm the one who happened to be in the right place. Nira didn't look up from Aaron's face. Or the wrong place, depending on how this turns out. The captain says you refuse to let the healers examine the princess. The captain talks too much. Mira laughed, quick and surprised. Maybe, but she's also right. You're either very brave or very stupid. Everyone keeps saying that. Nira's mouth twisted. Still haven't figured out which one I am. Maybe both. Mira leaned forward, elbows on her knees. Can I ask you something? You're going to anyway. Why? Why risk everything for people you don't know? The Emperor, the baby. They're nothing to you. You could have called the guards the moment you found them. Let someone else take the responsibility. But you didn't. You brought them inside. You saved them yourself. Why? Naira was quiet for a long moment, watching Aaron drink, feeling the weight of that tiny body in her arms. Because no one else was there, she said finally. Because they needed help and I could give it. Because... She stopped, swallowed hard. Because I know what it feels like to need help and have everyone walk away. And I won't be that person. I won't be someone who hears a baby crying in the dark and does nothing. Mira's eyes went soft. You're not what I expected. Yeah, well, I'm full of surprises. The door to the bedchamber opened and the healer emerged, stripping off gloves that were stained with blood and something that glowed faintly green. He'll live, she announced, and the relief that flooded through Naira was so intense it was almost painful. Barely. Another hour and the internal bleeding would have killed him, bond or no bond. But he's stable now. Bond? Naira's voice came out sharper than she intended. The healer's eyes locked onto her, suddenly assessing in a way that made Naira feel stripped bare. You don't know. Not a question. Of course you don't know. Why would anyone tell the mate about the mate bond? The room tilted. I'm not... Naira started. Save it. The healer waved one hand dismissively. I can see it clear as daylight, written all over both of you. Unmated, unclaimed, but bonded nonetheless. When did it snap into place? Naira's mouth was dry. I don't know what you're talking about. Tonight, at the choosing. The healer's voice went gentler. When you were rejected, yes? You felt something, didn't you? A pull, a recognition, and he... She gestured toward the bedchamber. He felt it too. That's why he shifted and ran. That's why he was out there dying in the forest with his newborn daughter. He was coming for you. That's insane, Naira whispered. That's fate. The healer shrugged. And it doesn't care whether you think it's insane or not. The bond exists. What you do with it is your choice. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. He'll wake in a few hours. When he does, he's going to want two things, his daughter and his mate. I suggest you figure out which one you're willing to be. The door closed behind her. Naira sat frozen, Aaron still drinking peacefully in her arms, while her entire world rearranged itself around this new, impossible truth. Mate. The Emperor's mate. She wanted to laugh, or scream, or both. Instead, she just held Aaron tighter and tried to breathe through the panic clawing up her throat. Draven woke to pain and the scent of lilac and rain. His body screamed protest when he tried to move, every muscle and nerve ending reporting damage in sharp, insistent detail. The wounds were healing. He could feel his power knitting flesh back together, slower than usual, but steady. But the process hurt like fire and broken glass. But the scent, that scent cut through the pain like light through darkness, soothing something fundamental in his chest, something that had been raw and bleeding since he'd watched that bastard Kaelin reject her in front of the entire court. Naira, his Omega, his mate, the one he'd almost died trying to reach. Draven forced his eyes open, blinking against the dim light of his bedchamber. Dawn, maybe, or close to it. The storm had passed, leaving that particular quality of silence that only came after violence. You're awake! The voice came from his right, rough and broken, and the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. Draven turned his head, ignoring the way his neck muscles protested, and found her. Naira sat in the chair beside his bed, wearing the same clothes from last night, stained with his blood and dirt and gods knew what else. Her hair was falling out of whatever arrangement she'd tried to maintain, dark strands framing a face that was too pale, too thin, with shadows under her eyes that spoke of exhaustion and stress and zero sleep. She was holding Aaron, his daughter cradled against her chest, both of them watching him with identical wariness, and she was the most perfect thing Draven had ever seen. How long? His voice came out as a rasp. 6 hours since they brought you here. Naira's arms tightened fractionally around Aaron. The healer says you'll live. Congratulations. You saved me. Not a question. I saved your daughter first. You were just convenient. But her eyes betrayed her, flicking to the bandages visible above the sheet covering his chest, checking, assessing. Concerned, Draven's mouth curved despite the pain. Liar. Excuse me? You care about both of us. I can see it. Nera's jaw tightened. I care about not letting babies die in forests. Don't read into it. You felt it too. Draven pushed himself up on the pillows, biting back a groan. At the choosing. When that fool stood there running his mouth, declaring you defective, you felt the bond snap into place. Silence. Then quietly, I don't know what I felt. Yes, you do. Draven held her gaze, willing her to understand. You felt everything change. You felt something in your chest crack open. I felt like I was dying, Naira cut in, her voice sharp. I felt humiliated and worthless, and like everyone in that hall was right about me. That's what I felt. No. Draven leaned forward, and the movement pulled at his stitches, but he didn't care. That's what they made you feel. That's what their judgment and their cruelty made you believe. But underneath that, buried beneath all their poison, you felt the bond. You felt me. I felt nothing. But her hands were shaking where they held Aaron. And even if I had, it doesn't matter. You're the Emperor. I'm a broken Omega who can barely speak. There is no universe where that bond means anything. This one. Draven's voice dropped, became something rougher. This universe. Right here. Where you saved my life and my daughter's life and asked for nothing in return. Where you stood in front of royal guards and refused to back down because you'd made a promise to a dying wolf in the darkness. Where you... Stop. Nera stood up, and Aaron made a small sound of protest at the sudden movement. Just stop. I don't know what you think this is, but I can't. The door slammed open. 3 people swept in, and Draven recognized them immediately. Council members, the old guard, the ones who thought they ran the kingdom because they'd been pulling strings since before he was born. Lord Castellan led them, tall and thin and vicious, with gray hair and eyes like chips of ice. Your Majesty, he said, and his voice dripped with false concern. Thank the gods you're alive. When we heard about the attack, get out! Draven's voice was flat, absolute. Castellan blinked. I beg your pardon? I said get out. I'm not receiving visitors. With respect, Your Majesty, this isn't a social call. Castellan's eyes flicked to Naira, then to Aaron, and something ugly crossed his face. We need to discuss what happens next. The security breach, the child's future, and his gaze lingered on Naira with open disgust. The presence of unauthorized individuals in your private chambers. Naira had gone very still. Draven felt rage spike through him, hot and vicious, strong enough that his power flared and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. That unauthorized individual saved my life, he said, each word precise and deadly. You will show her respect or I will show you the door, permanently. Of course, Your Majesty. Castellan's smile was thin. We're all very grateful for her assistance, which is why the council has prepared appropriate compensation, a generous sum, enough to set her up quite comfortably somewhere far from court, somewhere she can live quietly without the burden of, no. Nera's voice cut through, rough but clear. Every head turned toward her. No? Castellan's eyebrows rose. My dear girl, I don't think you understand the offer. I understand perfectly. Naira lifted her chin, and Draven watched something fierce and unbreakable settle across her features. You want to pay me off, send me away. Pretend tonight never happened. But I'm not leaving. That's not your decision to make. Lady Merrick, another council member, stepped forward. The child needs proper care, a wet nurse, a nursery staff trained in royal protocol. The child needs her father, Nera interrupted. And until he's well enough to care for her himself, she stays with me. Absolutely not. Castellan's voice hardened. You have no claim to her, no legal standing, no rights whatsoever. You are, forgive my bluntness, nobody. A broken Omega from a minor pack who happened to be in the right place at the right time. That doesn't make you family. It certainly doesn't make you qualified to... Enough! Draven's word cracked like a whip. The council members fell silent, but their expressions remained hostile, calculating. Naira stays, Draven said, his voice leaving no room for argument, with Aaron, in the palace, until I say otherwise. Your Majesty, Castellan started, are you questioning your emperor? The temperature dropped another 5 degrees. Castellan's mouth snapped shut, but his eyes promised this wasn't over. Good. Draven leaned back against the pillows, exhaustion pulling at him. Now get out, all of you, and spread the word. Naira Voss is under my personal protection. Anyone who touches her, threatens her, or attempts to remove her from these premises will answer to me directly. The council members retreated, their departure swift but their anger palpable. When the door closed behind them, silence fell heavy and weighted. Naira was staring at him, her expression unreadable. Why? She finally asked. Because you're mine. The words came out raw, honest. Because the bond says so, and my wolf says so, and every instinct in my body says so. Because I watched you get rejected by a fool who didn't deserve to breathe the same air, and I couldn't claim you then, but I can protect you now. Because you feel guilty. Naira's voice was flat. You watched him humiliate me, and you did nothing, and now you think throwing protection at me makes up for it. No. Draven held her gaze. I think nothing makes up for it. I think I failed you when you needed someone to stand up, and I stayed silent. But guilt isn't why I want you here. The bond is why. You are why. You don't even know me. I know you pulled shrapnel out of a dying wolf. I know you refused to give up my daughter to trained guards. I know you're standing here exhausted and terrified and completely out of your depth, and you haven't backed down once. His voice softened. I know enough. Aaron started fussing, and Nira looked down at her, using the baby as an excuse to break eye contact. She needs to be changed, Nira said quietly, and fed. And I need... She stopped, swallowed. I need sleep. Real sleep. Not 10-minute chunks between crisis moments. So sleep. Draven gestured toward the sitting room. There's a bedroom attached. Take it. I'll have Mira bring everything you need for Aaron. And if the council comes back, then I'll deal with them. His jaw set. You're under my protection, Naira. That means something. It means they can't touch you without going through me first. She looked at him for a long moment, something complicated moving behind her eyes. Then, so quietly, he almost missed it. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Draven's smile was grim. They're going to make your life hell. The council, the court, everyone who thinks you're reaching above your station, staying here, accepting my protection, it puts a target on your back. I already have a target on my back. Naira's hand drifted to Aaron's head, stroking soft hair. At least here, I have a chance to fight back. She turned and walked toward the sitting room, and Draven watched her go, this Omega who should have been his from the moment the bond snapped, but whom he'd failed to claim when it mattered. He'd fix that. But first, he needed to heal. And then he needed to burn down every obstacle standing between him and his mate. Nira didn't mean to fall asleep, but the moment her head hit the pillow in the absurdly comfortable bed in the sitting room's attached bedroom, her body simply shut down. Aaron was fed and changed and sleeping in an actual crib that Mira had somehow manifested within minutes, and the room was warm and quiet and safe, and Naira's exhausted brain finally stopped screaming long enough for unconsciousness to take her under. She dreamed of silver eyes and storm clouds and a voice that said mine like it was both promise and threat. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through windows she didn't remember seeing, and Aaron was crying. Naira was on her feet before fully conscious, stumbling to the crib, scooping up the baby with movements that were already becoming automatic. Hey, shh, I've got you. She checked. Wet diaper. Of course. Okay, let's fix this. She'd just finished changing Aaron when someone knocked on the bedroom door. Come in, Nira called, her voice rough from sleep and disuse. Mira entered, carrying a tray that smelled like food and looked like enough to feed 4 people. The Emperor ordered breakfast for you, she said, setting the tray on the small table by the window. He was quite insistent that you eat properly. How long was I asleep? 4 hours. He wanted to let you rest longer, but Mira's expression went carefully neutral. There are people here to see you. Dread settled cold in Nira's stomach. Who? Your aunt and Kaelin Virex. Of course, of fucking course. Tell them I'm not available, Nira said, moving to the tray and trying to project a calm she absolutely didn't feel. I did. They said they'd wait. Mira hesitated. The Emperor offered to have them removed, but Lady Voss insisted it was family business. She's quite loud about it. Nira could imagine. Her aunt had made a career out of being loud when she wanted something. Fine. Nira picked up a piece of toast, forcing herself to chew and swallow even though her stomach was in knots. Give me 10 minutes to make myself presentable, then send them in. Are you sure? You don't have to see them. Yes, I do. Nira met Mira's worried gaze. Better to face it now than let them build ammunition. Mira left, and Nira spent exactly 9 minutes eating, feeding Aaron, and trying to make herself look less like she'd been dragged through hell backwards. She failed. But when her aunt swept into the room with Kaylin trailing behind her, Nira was standing in the center of the space, Aaron in her arms, her chin up, and her spine straight. Nira! Her aunt's voice was sugar over poison. There you are. We've been so worried. Have you? Of course, when we heard about the incident, we came immediately. Her aunt's eyes flicked to Aaron, and something hungry moved behind them. My poor dear, you must have been terrified. But don't worry, we're here now. We'll take care of everything. Everything's already taken care of. Nira's arms tightened around Aaron. Thanks for your concern. Don't be difficult. Her aunt's smile hardened. We need to discuss your situation. You can't possibly think you're staying here, playing nursemaid to the Emperor's bastard. Careful. The word came out sharp. That's the royal heir you're talking about. That's a complication you don't need. Kaylin spoke for the first time, and his voice was exactly as Nira remembered, smooth and cold and utterly certain of his own rightness. Whatever the Emperor told you, whatever promises he made, they won't last. The council will never accept you. The court will eat you alive. Maybe, Nira met his eyes, or maybe I'm harder to kill than you think. Kaylin's expression flickered. Surprise, maybe, or anger that she wasn't cowering. This is about the rejection, isn't it? He stepped closer, and Nira fought the urge to step back. You're angry. I understand, but trying to use the Emperor's gratitude to... I'm not using anything. Nira's voice was steady. I saved his life. He offered protection. I accepted. That's the beginning and end of it. Protection. Her aunt's laugh was ugly. Is that what they're calling it now? Nira, be realistic. Men like the Emperor don't offer protection out of kindness. They want something in return. And when you can't give it to them, when they realize you're broken and useless, they'll discard you just like you did? Nira finished quietly. Just like you sent me to live in that falling apart cottage because having a defective niece was bad for your reputation? Just like you stood in that hall last night and watched them tear me apart and didn't say one word in my defense? Her aunt's face flushed. That's not fair. I did what I could. I tried to... You did nothing. Nira's voice dropped, became something harder. And that's fine. I learned to survive without you, without anyone. So don't come here now pretending concern, pretending family, when what you really want is to make sure I don't become an embarrassment to you again. How dare you? I think we're done here. Nira looked at Kaylin. Is there anything else? Or did you just come to make sure I understood my place? Kaylin's jaw worked. I came to offer you a way out. The Emperor's protection won't last. But if you're smart, if you leave now while you still can, I'll make sure you're taken care of. A settlement, somewhere quiet. No one needs to know about how you rejected me? Nira's smile had no warmth. About how you stood in front of everyone and called me defective? No, I think people should know about that. I think they should know exactly what kind of alpha you are. You're making a mistake. Probably. Nira turned away, done with this conversation, done with both of them. But it's my mistake to make. Nira, her aunt started. Get out! Nira didn't look back. Both of you, and don't come back. The Emperor can't protect you forever, Kaylin said, and his voice carried weight now, threat. Eventually, you'll have to face reality. And when that happens, then I'll deal with it. Nira glanced over her shoulder, but not with you. Never with you again. They left, and Nira stood there shaking, Aaron pressed against her chest while the room slowly stopped spinning. She'd done it, stood up to them, refused to back down, and it felt terrifying, exhilarating, right. The door opened again and Nira tensed, ready for round 2. But it was just Draven, leaning heavily against the doorframe, his face pale, but his eyes burning with something fierce. I heard, he said quietly. How much? Enough. He pushed off the doorframe, moving into the room with careful, measured steps that spoke of pain barely controlled, enough to want to tear them both apart. Don't. Nira's voice was tired. They're not worth it. You are. Draven stopped in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him, close enough that his scent, cedar and smoke and something wild, filled her lungs. You're worth burning the entire kingdom down for. You barely know me. I know enough. His hand came up, hovering near her face, not quite touching. I know you're strong. I know you're brave. I know you refuse to let my daughter die, even though keeping her put you in danger. That's enough. Nira's breath caught. This close, she could see the silver flecks in his dark eyes, could see the way his pupils dilated when he looked at her, could feel the pull of the bond she'd been trying so hard to deny. This is crazy, she whispered. Completely. His voice was rough. But I'm done fighting it, done pretending I don't feel it. The bond chose you, my wolf chose you, and I... He stopped, swallowed hard. I choose you too. You can't. Nira's eyes stung. The council will... Fuck the council. Draven's hand finally made contact, cupping her cheek with a gentleness that belied the violence in his words. Fuck anyone who thinks they can tell me who my mate is. You saved my life. You saved Arn's life. You stood in front of guards and council members and your own family and refused to break. You're exactly who I need, who we need. I'm broken, Nira said, and her voice cracked on the word. I can't even speak properly. How can I be... You're not broken. Draven's thumb brushed across her cheekbone. You're scarred. There's a difference. And scars mean you survived something that tried to kill you. That makes you a fighter. That makes you perfect. Aaron chose that moment to start crying, and the sound broke the tension like a hammer through glass. Nira pulled back, focusing on the baby, trying to get her breathing under control. She's hungry again, she managed. Then feed her. Draven's hand dropped, but he didn't move away. And when you're done, we need to talk, really talk, about what happens next. Okay? He left, and Nira sank into the chair, Aaron fussing in her arms while her world continued to tilt on its axis. Mate. The Emperor's mate. It should have felt impossible. Instead, it felt inevitable. And that terrified her more than anything. The council meeting happened whether Draven wanted it or not. He sat at the head of the long table in the war room, still weak from his injuries, but damned if he'd show it, and faced down 12 of the kingdom's most powerful people while they argued about his life like he wasn't sitting right there. The situation is untenable, Lord Castellan said for the third time. The girl cannot stay. The girl has a name, Draven said, his voice flat. Use it. Fine. Nira Voss cannot stay. She has no rank, no standing, no training for court life. Keeping her here, in your private quarters, with the heir, it sends the wrong message. What message is that? Draven leaned back in his chair, ignoring the pull of healing tissue. That I value loyalty? That I protect those who protect me? That you're weak, Lady Merrick's voice cut like a knife. That you let sentiment cloud judgment? That you'd elevate a broken Omega above the good of the kingdom? Careful. Draven's power flared and the candles in the room guttered. You're coming dangerously close to insulting my mate. Dead silence. Then chaos erupted. You're what? You can't be serious. The bond hasn't been claimed. It's not official. You can't just... Enough! Draven's voice cracked like thunder, and the room fell silent. The bond exists. Claimed or not, Nira Voss is my mate. That makes her future empress. That makes her untouchable. Is that clear, Your Majesty? Castellan's voice had gone very soft, very dangerous. With respect, the council must approve any royal marriage, and we will never approve a mute Omega with no bloodline and no power. The kingdom deserves better. You deserve better. The kingdom will get what I give it. Draven stood, and even weakened, he was the most dominant presence in the room. And I'm giving it Nira. Then you're giving it instability. Merrick stood too. Do you have any idea what will happen when word spreads? When the other packs realize you've chosen a defective Omega over their carefully bred daughters? When foreign courts learn that the Emperor's mate can't even speak for herself at negotiations? She won't need to speak. Draven's smile was sharp. I'll speak for her. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. This is madness. This is done. Draven's power filled the room, pressing down on everyone until they felt it in their bones. Naira stays. She is under my protection, and anyone who threatens her, undermines her, or attempts to remove her will answer to me. Do I make myself absolutely clear? Silence. Then, reluctantly, nods. But Draven could see it in their eyes. This wasn't acceptance. This was strategic retreat. They'd regroup, find another angle, come at him from a different direction. He'd be ready. The meeting dissolved, and Draven made his way back to his chambers, each step a battle against exhaustion and pain. He found Naira in the sitting room, Aaron asleep in her arms, staring out the window with an expression he couldn't quite read. They're going to fight this, she said without looking at him. The council, the court, everyone. I know. You can't win against all of them. Watch me. Draven moved to stand beside her, following her gaze out over the palace grounds. I didn't survive assassination attempts, and coup plots, and poisoned wine by backing down when things got difficult. This is different. Naira's voice was quiet. This is about me. About claiming a mate they think is beneath you. They'll use it against you. Undermine you, make you choose between me and the throne. Then I'll choose you. She finally looked at him, and her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. You can't mean that. I've never meant anything more. Draven reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The throne is just power, Naira. He stopped, searching for words. You're the first person in years who's looked at me and seen something worth saving instead of something worth using. That's not nothing. That's everything. You barely know me, she whispered again, but it sounded weaker this time, like she was trying to convince herself more than him. Then let me know you. His hand cupped her face. Let me prove that this isn't gratitude or guilt or temporary insanity. The door crashed open for the third time that day, but this time it wasn't council members. It was the captain, her face pale, her voice urgent. Your Majesty, we have a problem. Draven didn't move his hand from Nira's face. What kind of problem? Kalen Virex just filed a formal complaint with the High Court. He's claiming... The captain's jaw worked. He's claiming that Naira kidnapped the royal heir, that she's holding the princess against her will, using her as leverage to secure a position at court. He wants her arrested and the child returned to proper custody immediately. The world went very, very still. Nira's face had gone white, and Draven felt something inside him snap. Not breaking, but transforming, cold rage crystallizing into absolute certainty. Get me a formal robe, he said, his voice deadly calm. And summon the High Court. All of them. Right now. Your Majesty, you're still healing. Right now, Captain. She fled. Draven turned to Naira, whose hands were shaking where they held Aaron. He can't do this, she whispered. He can't just... He can. He did. Draven's hands closed over hers, steady and warm. But he just made the biggest mistake of his miserable life. What are you going to do? Draven's smile was cold and sharp and absolutely merciless. I'm going to claim you, he said, right now, in front of the High Court and every witness I can gather. I'm going to make you mine so completely, so publicly, that there will be no question, no doubt, no room for Kalen or anyone else to challenge your place. Nira's breath caught. The council doesn't get a vote. Not on this. His grip tightened. The High Court does. And the High Court follows ancient law, mate law, bond law. If I claim you in front of them, if the bond is sealed and witnessed, they have to recognize it. They have to recognize you. And if I refuse? The question came out barely audible. Draven went very still. Then I'll fight Kalen's claim another way. I'll protect you. But I won't force a bond you don't want, no matter what it costs me. They looked at each other, and Naira saw the truth in his eyes. He meant it. He'd let her walk away if that's what she chose, but walking away meant facing Kalen's accusations alone, meant losing Aaron, meant being powerless again, broken again, invisible again, meant going back to being the girl in the gray dress who let the world happen to her. And Naira was so fucking tired of being that girl. Okay, she said. Okay. Claim me. Her voice got stronger. Right now, in front of everyone. Make it impossible for them to ignore me ever. The High Court assembled in less than an hour, which told Naira exactly how serious this was. She stood in Draven's chambers, holding Aaron, while Mira helped her into a dress that actually fit, deep green silk that probably cost more than her cottage, with silver embroidery that caught the light when she moved. Someone had done something to her hair, pulling it back in a way that made her look less like a disaster and more like someone who might actually belong in a palace. But her hands were still shaking. "You don't have to do this," Mira said quietly, fastening the last clasp. "There are other ways." "No." Naira's voice was rough but steady. "There aren't. Not anymore." The door opened and Draven entered, wearing formal robes that made him look every inch the Emperor despite the pallor of his skin, the careful way he held himself that spoke of injuries still healing beneath expensive fabric. His eyes found Naira, and something heated flared in them. "You look—" He stopped, swallowed. "Ready?" "No." Naira adjusted her grip on Aaron. "But let's do it anyway." They walked through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, guards flanking them on both sides. And Naira felt the weight of eyes tracking her movement, heard the whispers that followed in her wake. "That's her. The one who saved him. The broken Omega. The one who thinks she can be Empress." She lifted her chin and kept walking. The High Court met in a chamber that made the choosing hall look modest. Vaulted ceilings that disappeared into shadow, pillars carved from black marble, and a circular floor inlaid with silver that formed patterns Naira's eyes couldn't quite follow. Seats rose in tiers around the central space, already filled with court officials, pack representatives, and what looked like every important person in the kingdom. And standing in the center, looking smug and righteous, was Kaelin Virex. Naira's steps faltered. Draven's hand found the small of her back, steady and warm. "Keep walking. Eyes on me, not him." But Naira couldn't help it. Her gaze locked with Kaelin's across the distance, and she saw triumph there, certainty, the absolute conviction that he'd already won. The High Judge sat in the raised seat at the far end, an ancient alpha with white hair and eyes that had seen too much, wearing robes that marked him as outside pack politics, answerable only to law and tradition. "Emperor Draven Kaelor," his voice carried across the chamber, formal and heavy with authority. "You have called this emergency session. State your purpose." Draven moved to the center of the silver circle, and Naira followed because his hand was still at her back, guiding her, grounding her. "I invoke ancient right," Draven said, his voice clear and strong. "The claiming of a true mate before the High Court. I request formal witness and recognition under bond law." Murmurs erupted through the chamber. The High Judge's eyebrows rose. "That is your right as Emperor. Who do you claim?" "Naira Voss." Draven turned to her and his eyes were silver fire. "My true mate, chosen by the bond, recognized by my wolf, claimed by my will." "I object." Kaelin's voice cut through, sharp and confident. The High Judge's gaze shifted. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that Naira Voss is currently under investigation for kidnapping the royal heir." Kaelin stepped forward, playing to the crowd. "She cannot be claimed as mate while facing criminal charges. That would be a mockery of justice." "The charges are false," Draven said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "And you know it." "Do I?" Kaelin's smile was thin. "Then perhaps you can explain why an Omega with no connection to the royal family, no permission from the council, no authorization whatsoever, currently has possession of your daughter? Why she's been living in your private quarters, sleeping in rooms adjacent to yours, with unlimited access to the heir?" "Because I gave her that access," Draven said. "Because she saved both our lives." "So you say." Kaelin turned to the High Judge. "But we have only the Emperor's word. No other witnesses to this alleged rescue. No evidence beyond his testimony, and given his obvious attachment to the accused, one has to question whether his judgment is clouded." Naira felt ice sliding down her spine. The High Judge looked at Draven. "Do you have witnesses? Anyone who can corroborate your account?" "My guards found them together," Draven said. "My healer treated the wounds Naira had already closed. Found them together, yes. But did anyone actually witness the rescue itself?" Kaelin pressed. "Or did they simply find an Omega who claimed to have saved you, conveniently positioned to take advantage of your gratitude. That's not what happened, Naira said, her rough voice carrying across the chamber. Every eye turned to her. Kalen's smile widened. Ah, the accused speaks. Tell me, Naira, did you know who the Emperor was when you rescued him? No. He was in wolf form, I thought. You thought he was just a dying beast. How convenient. And yet somehow you managed to treat wounds that would have killed a trained healer. You managed to keep both the Emperor and his newborn daughter alive through an entire night. Quite impressive for someone with no medical training. I did what was necessary. Or? Kalen's voice sharpened. You were part of the plan from the beginning. You knew the Emperor would be vulnerable after the birth. You knew about the assassination attempt. You positioned yourself perfectly to be his savior and secure a place at court. The accusation hung in the air like poison. Naira's breath caught. That's insane. I would never— Wouldn't you? Kalen circled her slowly, a predator scenting blood. You were rejected at the choosing, humiliated in front of everyone. Told you were worthless, defective, unwanted. That must have hurt, must have made you angry. Angry enough to plot revenge? Angry enough to align yourself with the Emperor's enemies? No. But Naira's voice came out weak, shaken. I have evidence, Kalen said, and produced a paper from his jacket. A signed confession from Marcus Threll, one of the assassins captured after the attack. He claims that a female Omega provided information about the Emperor's location that night, an Omega who was at the choosing, an Omega who had reason to hate the current power structure. The chamber erupted. Naira felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. I would never— Show me. Draven's voice cut through the chaos. Kalen handed the paper to the High Judge, who read it with an expression that gave nothing away. The confession names no specific person, the High Judge said slowly. Only a description. Female Omega, present at the choosing, dark hair, approximately 20 years of age. That could be half the Omegas at court, Draven said. Or it could be her. Kalen's eyes locked on Naira. The one who conveniently found you dying. The one who isolated you from proper medical care for hours. The one who has been alone with your daughter ever since, with unlimited opportunity to— Enough! Draven stepped between Kalen and Naira, his power flooding the room. You're reaching, desperate, trying to destroy her because you can't accept that she's worth more than you ever gave her credit for. Am I? Kalen didn't back down. Or am I the only one willing to see the truth? Think about it, Your Majesty. She appears at exactly the right moment. She refuses help from trained guards. She insists on keeping the princess close. And now, facing investigation, she suddenly agrees to a mate bond that would make her untouchable? It's textbook manipulation. It's textbook survival, Naira said, finding her voice again. You filed false charges to destroy me. Of course I'd accept protection. False charges? Kalen's laugh was harsh. Then explain this. He produced another paper and Naira's blood went cold when she recognized the handwriting. Her handwriting. From 3 months ago when she'd applied for a position in the palace kitchens. A simple job application that asked for her schedule, her availability, her current living situation. Information that, taken in the right context, could look like reconnaissance. She documented the Emperor's routine, Kalen said, showing the paper to the High Judge. Guard rotations, meal times, when he'd be most vulnerable, all written in her own hand, submitted weeks before the attack. That was a job application, Naira said, but her voice was shaking now. I was trying to find work. You needed access. Kalen's voice was relentless. And when the application was rejected, you found another way in. Through his daughter, through his guilt, through a bond you probably triggered yourself with illegal potions. That's not how bonds work, and you know it, Draven snarled. Do I? Kalen turned to the High Judge. I request a formal investigation. Blood test to determine if artificial bond manipulation occurred. A full inquiry into Naira Voss's activities in the weeks leading up to the attack. An immediate removal of the princess into proper custody until the investigation concludes. No. The word tore out of Naira before she could stop it. No? The High Judge's gaze fixed on her. You refuse a lawful investigation? Naira looked down at Aaron, sleeping peacefully in her arms, trusting and warm and safe. She needs me. She won't take a bottle from anyone else. She cries when I'm not holding her. She's a baby, Kaylin said coldly. She'll adapt. Unless, of course, you've done something to ensure she can't. Another potion, perhaps? Something to bind her to you artificially? You're insane, Nera whispered. Then prove it. Submit to the investigation. Let the healers examine you. Let them test your blood, check for foreign substances, verify the bond is natural. Kaylin's smile was sharp. Unless you have something to hide. Nera looked at Draven, desperate, but his face had gone carefully blank, the expression of someone trying very hard not to show what they're thinking. And in that blankness, Nera saw doubt. Tiny, barely there, but present. He didn't believe Kaylin. She knew he didn't. But he wasn't certain anymore, wasn't absolutely, unquestionably sure. And that doubt was a knife in her chest. Your Majesty? The High Judge's voice. What is your position? Draven was quiet for a long moment. Then, I want the truth. Each word landed like a blow. If there was manipulation, I need to know. If the bond was artificial, if Nera was involved in the attack, I need to know. His eyes met hers, and they were full of something that looked like pain. Submit to the investigation. Prove him wrong. Prove you're who I think you are. And if I refuse? Nera's voice came out hollow. Then you'll look guilty. Draven's jaw tightened. And I can't protect someone who won't protect themselves. The chamber was dead silent. Nera looked at the man who'd called her his mate, who'd promised to burn the kingdom down for her, who'd held her face and said she was perfect. And she saw him choose the throne. Not maliciously, not cruelly, but absolutely. Fine. She heard herself say the word from very far away. I'll submit to your investigation. I'll prove I had nothing to do with the attack, but... She looked down at Aaron. She stays with me until it's done. Absolutely not, Kaylin started. That's my condition. Nera's arms tightened. You want me to cooperate? She stays with me. Non-negotiable. The High Judge looked at Draven, who looked at Nera, and after a long, waited pause, nodded. Agreed, but you'll be confined to quarters under guard supervision, no contact with outside parties, no unsupervised access to anything that could compromise the investigation. Understood. And if the investigation finds evidence of wrongdoing, then I'll face whatever justice you decree. Nera lifted her chin. But it won't, because I'm innocent. We'll see, Kaylin said softly. The High Judge stood. Investigation authorized. Results to be presented in 3 days. Until then, Nera Voss is remanded to house arrest in the palace. The princess remains in her custody under guard supervision. This court is adjourned. The chamber emptied slowly, people filing out while casting glances at Nera that ranged from curious to hostile to pitying. Draven approached her as the last spectators left, his face still carefully neutral. Nera, don't. She stepped back. You made your choice. Now live with it. I had to choose the throne over me. I know. I understand. Her voice was flat. I'd do the same thing if I were you. Can't have an emperor who's too blinded by bond to see manipulation, right? Can't risk the kingdom for one broken Omega. That's not what this is, isn't it? She met his eyes. You believed him, Draven. Even for a second, even just a little. You looked at me and wondered if maybe I was using you. I looked at you and saw someone I barely know, Draven said, and the honesty in his voice hurt worse than anger would have. I want to believe you. Every instinct says you're telling the truth. But Kaylin's right about one thing. We've known each other less than 24 hours. The bond is real, but that doesn't mean I know your heart. Not yet. Nera laughed, and it came out broken. Well, at least you're honest about it. 3 days, Draven said. Prove him wrong. Prove you're innocent. And then what? You'll trust me? You'll claim me for real this time? She shook her head. Save it. I'll clear my name because I'm not going down for something I didn't do. But don't pretend this is about us. This is about you protecting your throne. She turned and walked toward the guards waiting to escort her to her new prison. Behind her, Draven said nothing, and that silence said everything. The quarters they gave her were luxurious and suffocating. 3 rooms, bedroom, sitting room, nursery, all beautifully appointed and carefully locked. Guards outside the door, guards outside the windows, probably guards in the walls for all Nera knew. Mira was allowed in twice a day to bring supplies, but their conversations were monitored. No one else was permitted contact. Naira spent the first night pacing, Aaron fussing in her arms, while her mind went in circles trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so fast. The job application. That damn job application. She'd written it in desperation 3 months ago, after another rejection from another potential employer who took one look at her scarred throat and decided she wasn't worth the trouble. The palace had been her last hope. Surely they needed kitchen help, laundry workers, something that didn't require speaking, but the application had asked for details. Security questions. When was she available? What were her current obligations? What access would she need? She'd answered honestly, thoroughly, trying to prove she was responsible and trustworthy. And now those answers were being used as evidence that she'd been planning an assassination. It was brilliant, in a horrible way. Kaylin had always been smart. That's what made him dangerous. He'd taken her desperation and weaponized it, taken her attempts to survive and turned them into proof of conspiracy. And Draven? Nira squeezed her eyes shut against the burn of tears. Draven had hesitated. That's what hurt most. Not that he'd ordered the investigation. That was logical, even necessary given the evidence. But that moment in the high court when he'd looked at her and she'd seen doubt flicker across his face, like maybe she was exactly what Kaylin said. A manipulator, a conspirator, someone using his gratitude and the bond to secure power she didn't deserve. "Your father is a coward," Nira whispered to Aaron, who was finally sleeping against her shoulder. "But I guess I can't blame him. I'm a coward too. Otherwise I would have fought harder, would have made him believe me. Except, how do you make someone believe you when the evidence looks so damning? When even you can see how guilty it all appears from the outside?" The door opened and Mira slipped in, carrying the evening tray. "How is she?" Mira asked, nodding toward Aaron. "Fed, changed, still breathing." Naira's voice was dull. "That's about all I can manage right now." Mira set down the tray and moved closer, lowering her voice even though the guards were outside. "There's talk in the palace." "When isn't there?" "No, listen." Mira's eyes were urgent. "People are saying Kaylin has more evidence, something he's holding back, something that will prove your guilt beyond any doubt." Ice flooded Naira's veins. "What kind of evidence?" "I don't know. But he's confident, too confident, like he knows the investigation will go his way no matter what they find. Because he's rigged it." Nira sank into a chair. "Of course he has. Probably bribed the investigators, planted more false evidence, built an entire case while I've been sitting here like an idiot waiting to be exonerated." "So fight back." Mira knelt beside her chair. "You have 3 days. Use them." "To do what? I'm locked in here. I can't investigate anything. Can't talk to anyone. Can't even defend myself without it looking like I'm trying to cover my tracks." "Then don't defend yourself." Mira's voice dropped even lower. "Attack. Find Kaylin's weakness. Prove he's lying." "How?" "I don't know, but you're smart, resourceful. You survived years of being treated like dirt and came out fighting. Don't stop now just because the arena got bigger." Nira looked at this woman who'd shown her nothing but kindness since the moment they met and felt something crack in her chest. "Why are you helping me?" Mira smiled, sad and knowing. "Because I know what it's like to be the Omega everyone overlooks, the one they think is too weak, too broken, too nothing to matter. And I know what it feels like when someone finally sees you for who you really are." She glanced toward the door to Draven's chambers. "He sees you, Naira. Even with the doubt, even with the investigation, he sees you. Don't let Kaylin take that away." After Mira left, Nira stood at the window, looking out over the palace grounds while Aaron slept in her crib. Attack Kaylin's credibility. Find his weakness. But how? The man was careful, methodical. He wouldn't have brought this case unless he was certain he could win. Unless... Nira's breath caught. Unless he was too certain. Unless his confidence came from more than just fabricated evidence. What if Kaylin actually believed she was guilty? What if someone had convinced him? Fed him information designed to make him think Nira was the conspirator. But who would do that? And why? Naira's mind raced, pulling threads, following connections. The assassination attempt had been sophisticated. Multiple attackers, knowledge of the Emperor's schedule, weapons designed to kill an alpha in wolf form. That took resources. Planning. inside information, and someone willing to use that information to frame an innocent Omega for the crime. Someone who benefited from both the Emperor being weakened and Naira being destroyed. Someone on the council. Naira moved to the desk in the corner, found paper and pen, and started writing. Everything she remembered from that night. Every detail. The location where she'd found Draven. The timing. The wounds. The way they'd looked. Not random, but targeted. Precise. Professional. She wrote about the guards who'd arrived. Their reactions. The way the captain had looked at her. Like she'd expected to find Naira there. Like maybe someone had told her where to look. She wrote about Kaylin's evidence. The confession that named no one specifically. The job application that proved nothing except that Naira had needed work. All circumstantial. All designed to look damning without actually proving anything. Because the real conspirators were still out there. And they'd used her as a convenient scapegoat. Naira looked at her notes, seen patterns emerge, connections form. It wasn't proof. Not yet. But it was a start. The door opened without warning, and Naira barely had time to shove her papers into the desk drawer before Draven walked in. He looked exhausted, his face drawn and pale, moving with the careful precision of someone in pain but refusing to show it. "We need to talk," he said. "I thought unsupervised contact was forbidden. I'm the Emperor. I make the rules." But his voice lacked conviction. They stood looking at each other across the room, the space between them feeling like miles instead of feet. "The investigation starts tomorrow," Draven said finally. "Blood tests first. Then they'll interview witnesses, examine your cottage, review your background." "Looking for proof I'm a monster," Naira's voice was flat. "Looking for the truth." "You already decided what the truth is. Back in that court, when you hesitated, I hesitated because I'm terrified." The words came out raw. "Because everything Kaylin said made horrible, logical sense. Because I want to believe you so badly that it scares me. Because if I'm wrong about you, if you're using me, if this bond is a lie, then you've been played," Naira finished. "Then the great Emperor Draven Kalor got manipulated by a broken Omega, and everyone was right to doubt your judgment." That's exactly what you're thinking." Naira moved closer, and Draven's eyes tracked her movement like a predator watching prey. "You're thinking that trusting me could destroy you, that loving me could cost you the throne, that maybe, just maybe, everyone who said I'm worthless was right." "Stop," Draven's voice cracked. "Why? Because the truth hurts?" Nero was close enough now to see the silver in his eyes, the tension in his jaw. "Because you can't handle facing what you really think of me. I think you're magnificent." The words exploded out of him. "I think you're the strongest person I've ever met. I think you looked at a dying wolf and a helpless baby and chose compassion over safety. I think—" He stopped, breathing hard. "I think I'm falling for you, and it's happening too fast, and I don't know how to protect you and the kingdom at the same time, and I'm terrified I'm going to fail both." Silence crashed down. Naira stared at him, her carefully constructed anger crumbling in the face of his honesty. "I'm innocent," she said quietly. "I didn't help the assassins. I didn't manipulate the bond. I didn't plan any of this. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time and tried to do the right thing. That's all." "I know." Draven's hand came up, hovering near her face. "In my gut, in my wolf, in every part of me that matters." "I know. But the Emperor can't rule on gut feeling. I need proof, evidence, something that will satisfy the council and the court and everyone who's watching to see if I'm weak enough to let sentiment override judgment." "So I'm a test." Bitterness flooded Nira's voice. "Proof that you can still be objective, even when it costs you personally. You're my mate." His hand finally made contact, cupping her face. "And that makes you the most dangerous person in my world. Because I would burn it all down for you if I let myself. And I can't. I'm the Emperor. I have responsibilities, duties, millions of people depending on me to sacrifice me if necessary." Nira pulled back. "I understand, really I do. But don't expect me to make it easy." She turned away, moving to check on Aaron even though the baby was sleeping peacefully. Behind her, Draven was quiet for a long moment. Then, "If the investigation exonerates you, when it exonerates you, I want to complete the bond, properly, publicly, I want to make you empress and dare anyone to question it. And if it doesn't, then I'll spend the rest of my life figuring out how Kalen fabricated evidence good enough to fool trained investigators." His voice hardened. "Because you're innocent. I know you are. And if the system can't prove it, then the system is broken and needs to burn." Naira looked at him over her shoulder. "You can't burn the system, Draven. You are the system." "Then maybe it's time for something new." He moved toward the door. 3 days, Nira. Hold on for 3 days, please." He left, and Naira stood alone in her gilded cage, holding on to hope by her fingernails. The blood tests came back clean. No artificial bond manipulation, no foreign substances, no evidence of magical coercion. Nira should have felt relief. Instead, she felt dread, because Kalen didn't look worried when the results were announced. He looked satisfied, like he'd known they'd come back clean, like he was playing a longer game. The second day brought witness interviews, guards who'd found her with Draven, the healer who'd treated his wounds. Mira, who testified about Naira's care of Aaron. All of it painted a picture of someone competent and caring. None of it proved she wasn't a conspirator. Kalen's attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Vera Cross, tore into every testimony with surgical precision. Yes, Naira was caring for the princess, but couldn't that be part of establishing trust, gaining access? Yes, the Emperor's wounds were well treated, but Naira had no formal training. How did she know exactly what to do unless she'd known exactly what wounds to expect? Yes, the bond tested as natural, but bonds could form between anyone under extreme circumstances. That didn't prove Naira's intentions were pure. By the end of day 2, Naira could see the doubt spreading. Not certainty of her guilt, but enough uncertainty that the High Court would have grounds to rule against her. Reasonable doubt. The death of truth. That night, Nira couldn't sleep. She paced the quarters while Aaron slept, her mind spinning through possibilities, trying to find the angle she was missing. Someone had set her up. Someone with resources, intelligence, and a vested interest in seeing both the Emperor weakened and Naira destroyed. Someone on the council. But who? And how could she prove it from inside this locked room? She was reviewing her notes again when she heard it. Voices. Outside her window. The quarters were on the 3rd floor, overlooking a private courtyard that the guards used for shift changes. Usually it was quiet this late, but tonight 2 people were talking. Nira moved to the window, staying in shadow, and listened. Confirmed it's working. The investigation will conclude tomorrow with evidence of her guilt. Naira's blood went cold. That was Vera Cross, Kalen's attorney. And the Emperor? Another voice, male. Familiar, but she couldn't place it. Weakened, questioning his own judgment. By the time the verdict comes down, he'll be so tangled in doubt he won't be able to defend her without looking compromised. Vera's laugh was cold. Kalen played this perfectly. The council will be pleased. An emperor who can't trust his own mate bond is an emperor who can be controlled. Exactly. And once the Omega is removed, executed, or exiled, doesn't matter which, we move to phase 2. Naira's hands clenched on the windowsill. The child becomes a ward of the council, raised properly, trained to be useful instead of, what did Kalen call it? Yes, a liability inherited from a weak father. The male voice chuckled. Poetic. Draven loses his mate, his daughter, and his authority all in one move. And the council regains control of the throne. Vera's voice carried satisfaction. As it should be. They moved away, their voices fading, and Nira stood frozen at the window while her world rearranged itself around this new, terrible truth. It wasn't just Kalen, it was the council, a coup disguised as justice. They'd orchestrated the assassination attempt, framed her for it, and were using the investigation to destroy both her and Draven's ability to resist them. And tomorrow they'd produce their final piece of evidence, fabricated, planted, whatever it took, and she'd be condemned. Nira moved to the desk with shaking hands and pulled out her notes. She had tonight. One night to figure out how to prove conspiracy when the entire system was rigged against her. One night to find a way to save herself, Aaron, and an emperor who'd chosen duty over trust. One night to become someone strong enough to fight back. The broken Omega was gone. What rose in her place was something colder, harder, calculating. If the system was corrupt, she'd use that corruption against itself. If they'd fabricated evidence, she'd find the fabrication and expose it. If they thought she was weak and helpless and trapped, she'd prove them catastrophically wrong. Neera sat down and began to write. Not notes this time. A plan. Detailed, methodical, and absolutely ruthless. Because she'd tried playing by their rules and it had gotten her here, caged and accused and hours from destruction. So fuck their rules. She'd make her own. And when the sun rose on day 3, when they brought their manufactured evidence and their bought testimony and their certainty that she'd break, they were going to learn exactly what happened when you backed a desperate woman into a corner and gave her nothing left to lose. Neera looked at Arn sleeping peacefully in her crib, trusting that the world would keep her safe. "I'm sorry," Neera whispered. "I'm sorry for what I'm about to become. But they're not taking you from me. They're not using you as a weapon against your father, and they're sure as hell not winning this." She turned back to her plan, refining it, sharpening it into something that could cut through lies and corruption and the carefully constructed case against her. Outside, the palace slept. Inside, Naira Voss stopped being prey and started being the predator they should have feared from the beginning. Dawn broke cold and merciless. Naira stood in front of the mirror dressed in the clothes Mira had brought, simple gray, like the dress from the choosing, because if they wanted to see her as broken and beneath them, she'd use that assumption as camouflage. Let them underestimate her one last time. Arn was fed and content, left in Mira's care with instructions that made the woman's eyes go wide. "Are you sure about this?" Mira had whispered. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." The guards came at precisely 8 o'clock. "The High Court convenes in 1 hour," the captain said. "Final evidence will be presented. Do you have anything you wish to say before—" "I want to address the court," Neera said. "I invoke my right to speak in my own defense." The captain's eyebrows rose. "That's unusual. Most defendants let their advocates—" "I don't have an advocate. I have myself." Naira lifted her chin. "That's allowed, isn't it? Under law." "It is, but then I'll speak." Neera's voice was steady despite its roughness. "Lead the way." They walked through the palace, and this time Neera didn't look at the floor or try to disappear. She looked every person they passed directly in the eye and watched them flinch. The High Court chamber was packed, standing room only, everyone wanting to witness the broken Omega's fall. Kalen stood in the center, confident and composed, Vera crossed beside him with a folder that presumably contained the damning evidence they'd fabricated. Draven sat in the Emperor's box, his face carved from stone, silver eyes tracking Naira's every movement. The High Judge called the court to order. Final day of investigation into Naira Voss. Accused of conspiracy to commit regicide and kidnapping of the royal heir, the prosecution may present its closing evidence. Vera Cross stepped forward, opening her folder with theatrical precision. "Your Honor, we have obtained testimony from a palace servant who witnessed Naira Voss meeting with a known associate of the assassination group 3 weeks before the attack. This testimony, combined with the physical evidence already presented, establishes clear premeditation and—" "I'd like to see that testimony," Naira said, her voice cutting through. Everyone turned to stare. "Excuse me?" Vera's smile was thin. "The testimony. I'd like to see it, read it, verify its authenticity." Naira stepped forward. "That's my right as the accused, isn't it, Your Honor?" The High Judge looked surprised, but nodded. "It is." Vera hesitated just for a second. That hesitation told Neera everything she needed to know. "Now, if you please," Neera pressed. Vera handed over the paper with obvious reluctance. Naira read it carefully, her heart pounding, looking for what she knew had to be there, and found it. "This testimony is dated 4 days ago," she said slowly, "signed by a servant named Mara Kellis. But according to palace records—" She pulled out a paper of her own, one she'd had Mira steal from the administrative offices last night. "Mara Kellis was dismissed from palace service 6 weeks ago, for theft. She hasn't been on the ground since." Murmurs erupted through the chamber. Vera's face went carefully blank. Obviously there's been an administrative error. Or obviously this is fabricated testimony from a woman who was paid to lie. Neera's voice got stronger. A woman who wasn't even here to witness anything because she'd already been fired. "That proves nothing," Kalen interjected. "Memory can be—" "Memory," Neera turned on him. She claims to have seen me meeting with the assassin 3 weeks ago, while she was already fired and banned from the palace. Unless she has magic powers that let her see through walls and across distances, this testimony is worthless. The High Judge leaned forward. Counselor Cross, can you verify the witness's employment status? That is, we were assured. Vera was scrambling now, her composure cracking. You were assured by whoever paid you to manufacture evidence, Nira said, and her voice carried across the chamber like a blade. Just like someone paid Marcus Threll to give that vague confession. Just like someone doctored my job application to make it look suspicious. This entire case is built on lies, and I can prove it. These are serious accusations, the High Judge started, and I have serious proof. Nira pulled out more papers. The notes she'd made, the connections she'd drawn, the financial records Mira had helped her access. Marcus Threll received a payment of 50,000 marks 2 days after giving his confession, from an account traced to a shell company owned by Lord Castellan. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Maracellus received 75,000 marks yesterday, from the same source. This is absurd, Castellan stood, his face red. The bank records are public, Nira said. Anyone can verify them, including, she looked directly at Draven, the Emperor, who has access to financial auditing powers that would reveal every bribe, every payment, every piece of this conspiracy. Draven's eyes were burning silver fire. Your Honor, he said, his voice deadly calm. I request an immediate audit of all council member finances, and I want every piece of evidence in this case independently verified. Your Majesty, that's unprecedented, Vera started. So is attempting to frame my mate for treason. Draven stood, and his power filled the room like a physical force. So is using the justice system to execute a coup. So is, his gaze swept across the council members, thinking you could manipulate me into condemning an innocent woman to secure your own power. We were protecting the kingdom, Castellan said, but his voice had lost its certainty. You were protecting your control over the throne. Draven's voice dropped to something lethal. And you just committed treason doing it. Chaos erupted. Council members shouting, guards moving to block exits, the High Judge calling for order. And in the center of it all, Nira stood with her shoulders back and her head high, watching everything she'd built in one desperate night tear the conspiracy apart. Kaelin was staring at her with something that might have been respect or fury or both. He started. I survived, Nira said quietly, just for him. Despite everything you did, despite every attempt to destroy me, I survived, and now I'm going to watch your entire plan collapse. This isn't over, he said. Yes, Nira said. It is. The High Judge finally restored order, his voice carrying absolute authority. In light of new evidence suggesting systematic fabrication, I am suspending this investigation pending a full inquiry into the prosecution's methods and evidence sources. Nira Voss is hereby cleared of all charges pending said inquiry. She is free to... The door to the chamber exploded inward. Guards rushed in, their faces pale, their movements urgent. Your Majesty, the lead guard gasped. The princess, she's gone. Someone took her from the nursery. We found blood. Nira's world stopped. The guard kept talking, but she couldn't hear it over the roaring in her ears, couldn't process anything except, Aaron. Someone had taken Aaron, and the only person who'd known exactly where she was, exactly who was watching her. Nira's eyes locked on Mira, standing at the back of the chamber. Mira, who'd helped her investigate. Mira, who'd brought her supplies. Mira, who'd asked so many questions about Aaron's routine, her schedule, who watched her when. Mira, whose face had just gone white with what looked like guilt. No, Nira whispered. Mira ran, and Nira, with rage and betrayal and absolute fury flooding through her veins, ran after her. Behind her, Draven was shouting orders. The court was erupting. Everything was falling apart. But all Nira could think was, she'd trusted the wrong person. She'd been so focused on Kaelin and the council that she'd missed the real threat. And now Aaron was gone, taken by someone who'd pretended to be her friend. Someone who'd smiled and helped and waited for exactly the right moment to... Nira burst through the palace doors and saw Mira climbing into a carriage, saw someone else's hand reaching out to pull her inside, saw Nira's legs burned as she sprinted across the palace courtyard, her lungs screaming for air, but she didn't slow down. Couldn't slow down. Mira's carriage was pulling away, wheels clattering against cobblestone, and through the window Nira caught a flash of movement, someone holding a bundle that was crying. Aaron. Stop! The word tore out of Nira's ruined throat, rough and desperate. The carriage didn't stop. Nira pushed harder, her vision tunneling, her entire world narrowing to that moving target. She was 20 feet away, 15, 10. A hand caught her arm and yanked her back. Let me go! Nira whirled, fist already swinging. Draven caught it, his reflexes faster even while injured. You can't catch it on foot. Then get me a fucking horse. Already done. He pulled her toward the stables where guards were saddling mounts, their movements frantic and efficient. But you're not going alone. I wasn't asking. Draven's eyes were pure silver, his wolf rising to the surface. That's my daughter, my mate. You think I'm letting you face whatever's waiting out there without me? Nira wanted to argue, but there was no time. The carriage was disappearing through the palace gates, heading toward the forest road that led to the outer territories. A guard brought 2 horses, massive war stallions bred for speed and combat. Draven swung onto one with a grace that belied his healing injuries, and Nira took the other, her hands finding the reins on instinct, even though she hadn't ridden in years. Captain! Draven's voice cracked like a whip. Take 20 guards and follow, but stay back until I signal. This could be a trap. Your Majesty, you shouldn't. That's an order. Draven kicked his horse forward. Nira followed, and they exploded through the palace gates at a gallop. The city streets blurred past, citizens scrambling out of the way as 2 riders thundered through on war horses, moving too fast to be stopped or questioned. Nira's heart was slamming against her ribs hard enough to crack bone, her mind a white-hot fusion of rage and terror. Mira had her baby. Mira, who she'd trusted, who she'd let into her space, her thoughts, her plans, who'd been working for someone else the entire time. Who's behind this? Nira shouted over the pounding hooves. Don't know. Draven's jaw was set, his entire body coiled with barely contained violence. But when I find out, I'm going to tear them apart with my bare hands. They hit the forest road and the carriage tracks were clear in the mud from last night's rain. Fresh, recent, moving fast but not fast enough. There, Draven pointed. Half a mile ahead, the carriage was visible through the trees, swaying dangerously as it took corners too sharp, too reckless. They were running, which meant they knew pursuit was coming, which meant this was planned. Nira leaned forward, urging more speed from her horse, and the animal responded like it could feel her desperation. Trees whipped past in a blur of green and brown, branches reaching out like claws, but she didn't slow down. The carriage was 300 yards ahead. 200, 100, close enough now that Nira could see the driver, a man in dark clothes, his face covered, whipping the horses harder. Close enough to see the carriage door open. Close enough to see Mira lean out, holding Aaron, her face twisted with something that looked like regret and determination and fear all mixed together. Stop and we'll let her live, Mira's voice carried across the distance. Keep chasing and I drop her. Nira's blood turned to ice. She pulled hard on the reins, her horse skidding to a halt so violently she nearly went over its head. Draven stopped beside her, his face a mask of fury and calculation. You won't, he called back. She's valuable to whoever you're working for. You kill her, you lose your leverage. You willing to bet her life on that? Mira's hand shifted, holding Aaron out over the side of the moving carriage. Aaron was crying, her small body struggling, completely unaware of how close she was to death. Nira felt something crack inside her chest, some final restraint that had been holding her together. What do you want? Her voice came out steady despite the scream building in her throat. You. Mira's answer was immediate. Get off the horse, walk forward, alone, or she falls. No. Draven's hand shot out, grabbing Nira's arm. It's a trap. The moment you're vulnerable, they'll kill you both. Then what do you suggest? Nira snapped. Let them take her? Let them disappear into the forest with my... She stopped, the word catching in her throat. Not her daughter, not by blood, but by choice. By the night spent feeding her, changing her, watching her sleep. by the fierce protective instinct that said this child was hers and anyone who hurt her would die screaming. Your what? Mira's voice carried cruel amusement. Your daughter? You really think that, don't you? That you matter to her? That you're anything more than a convenient nursemaid? Shut your fucking mouth, Nira snarled. Or what? You'll attack me while I'm holding the precious heir? Mira's laugh was bitter. You have no power here, Nira. You never did. You're still just the broken Omega everyone pitches. The only difference is now you've deluded yourself into thinking you're something more. I said get off the horse. Draven's voice was low, deadly. I'll handle this. How? Your wolf form is still healing. You shift now and you'll tear yourself apart from the inside. Naira met his eyes. This is on me. I trusted her. I brought her into our space. We trusted her, Draven corrected. And we'll fix this, together. Time's up, Mira called. Choose now or she falls. Nira swung off her horse before Draven could stop her. What are you doing? He hissed. What I should have done from the beginning. Naira started walking forward, her hands raised, her body language screaming submission, even though everything inside her was coiled to attack. Protecting my daughter. She moved slowly, carefully, each step measured and deliberate. The carriage had stopped now, the driver turning to watch her approach with one hand on a weapon she couldn't quite see. 30 feet away. 20. 10. Close enough now to see Arn's face, red and tear-streaked and terrified. Close enough to see the regret in Mira's eyes. I'm sorry, Mira said quietly. I didn't want this. But they have my son. They said if I didn't help them, they'd kill him. I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. Nira stopped 5 feet from the carriage. You chose your child over mine. I understand that. But it doesn't change what happens next. And what's that? You give her back. Nira's voice dropped to something cold and absolute. Or I kill you and take her anyway. Mira's laugh was shaky. You're unarmed, alone. What are you going to... Nira moved. Fast, faster than Mira expected. Faster than the driver could react. She grabbed the carriage door and hauled herself up in one fluid motion, her hand shooting out to grab Aaron. Mira jerked backward, pulling the baby away, and Naira's fingers closed on air. I told you, Mira started. The driver's weapon came up, a crossbow, bolt already loaded and aimed at Naira's chest. Time slowed. Nira saw the finger tightening on the trigger, saw the angle of the shot, the trajectory that would punch through her ribs and into her heart, saw death coming and knew she couldn't dodge in time. Didn't matter. What mattered was Aaron. Nira lunged forward anyway, using her body as a shield, putting herself between the crossbow and the baby. The bolt flew, but it never hit her. Because Draven appeared like a storm made flesh, his hand catching the bolt mid-flight, his other hand already around the driver's throat. Bad decision, Draven said, and his voice was barely human. He ripped the driver out of his seat and threw him 15 feet, the man's body hitting a tree with a crack that said multiple bones had just shattered. Mira screamed, stumbling backward in the carriage, clutching Arn tighter. Please, she gasped. Please, my son is already dead. The new voice came from the forest. Everyone froze. A figure stepped out from between the trees and Nira's stomach dropped when she recognized him. Lord Castellan. But he wasn't alone. 12 men emerged behind him, all armed, all moving with the precision of trained killers. Mercenaries, Nira realized. Not palace guards. Professional muscle hired for one purpose: to kill. I'm sorry, Mira, Castellan said, and he actually sounded regretful. But we couldn't risk you changing your mind. Your son died 3 hours ago. Painlessly, if that matters. Mira's face went white, then gray. Then she simply folded, collapsing into the carriage with a sound that was barely human. And Arn, no longer being held, started to fall. Nira caught her. She didn't think about it, didn't plan it, just moved on pure instinct, throwing herself forward and catching the baby against her chest before she could hit the carriage floor. Got her. Safe. Alive. Well, Castellan's voice carried dark amusement. That's convenient. Saves us the trouble of securing the brats separately. Naira's arms tightened around Aaron, her body shifting to put herself between the baby and the mercenaries. Draven stepped in front of both of them, and his power exploded outward like a shockwave. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. The air itself seemed to compress, growing heavy and electric with the weight of an alpha's rage-given form. "You made a mistake coming here," Draven said, and his voice echoed with something ancient and terrible. "A fatal one." "Did I?" Castellan didn't look concerned. "You're outnumbered, still injured, and even if you weren't, even if you could somehow kill all of us, you'd die doing it. And then where would that leave your precious mate and daughter, alone, unprotected, easy prey for the next council that rises to fill the void? Then I guess I'll have to make sure I don't die." Draven's form began to shimmer. "Don't!" Naira grabbed his arm. "You shift now and you'll hemorrhage. The healer said another week minimum before your wolf form can—" "I know what the healer said." Draven didn't look at her, his eyes locked on Castellan and his mercenaries. "But I'm not letting them take you. Either of you." "So you'll kill yourself saving us?" Nira's grip tightened. "That's your plan? Better than the alternative." "The alternative is we fight smart instead of suicidal." Naira's mind was racing, calculating odds and angles and distances. "How many can you take without shifting?" "In my condition, 5. Maybe 6 if I get lucky. That leaves 6 for me." Draven finally looked at her, and his expression was part disbelief, part horror. "You can't fight 6 trained killers while holding a baby. Then I'll have to put her down." Nira's voice cracked on the words, but her eyes stayed hard. "And pray we both survive long enough to pick her back up." "This is touching," Castellan interrupted. "Really? But we're on a schedule. Mira, if you want a quick death instead of a slow one, I suggest you get out of that carriage and walk away." Mira didn't move. She was staring at nothing, her face empty, her body slack with grief and shock. "Fine," Castellan sighed. "Kill them all. Make it quick for the woman. Make it slow for the Emperor. And bring me the child alive." The mercenaries moved. Draven met them with violence that was almost beautiful in its efficiency. He didn't waste movement, didn't waste breath. Every strike was calculated to kill or incapacitate. Every dodge put him in position for the next attack. He caught the first mercenary's sword arm, twisted until bone snapped, used the screaming man as a shield against the second attacker's blade. Let the sword punch through his human shield and into the man behind. 2 down in 5 seconds. In 5. But the cost was visible. His movements were slower than they should be. His breathing labored, and when a mercenary's blade sliced across his ribs, reopening wounds that had barely closed, blood bloomed dark against his shirt. Naira saw it and felt something inside her snap. She looked down at Aaron, who was staring up at her with those silver eyes, trusting and helpless. "I'm sorry," Nira whispered. Naira laughs. She set the baby down in the carriage as gently as time allowed, tucking her behind Mira's unresponsive body where she'd be as protected as possible. Then Naira turned to face the 3 mercenaries who'd broken away from Draven and were advancing on her. She had no weapons, no training, no chance, but she had rage, and sometimes rage was enough. The first mercenary reached for her, probably planning to subdue rather than kill, to keep her alive for whatever Castellan had planned. Naira grabbed his reaching hand and bit down, hard, her teeth sinking into flesh until she tasted blood. The man screamed and jerked back, and Naira used his momentum to slam her forehead into his nose. Bone crunched, blood sprayed. She didn't wait to see him fall, was already moving to the second attacker, ducking under his swing and driving her elbow into his throat with everything she had. He went down choking, and Naira snatched his dropped knife before he hit the ground. The third mercenary was smarter, more cautious, circling her with his sword raised and his eyes calculating. "You're fast," he said. "I'll give you that. But you can't beat a trained swordsman with a knife." "Probably not." Nira's grip tightened on the blade. "But I can buy time." She lunged, not at him, but past him, toward Draven, who was now fighting 4 men at once and losing ground fast. The mercenary turned to follow her movement, which meant he wasn't watching the carriage, wasn't watching Mira, who'd finally moved, who'd grabbed the dead driver's crossbow with shaking hands. The bolt caught the mercenary in the back, punching through armor and spine. He dropped without a sound. Mira's eyes met Naira's across the distance, and Nira saw something break in them, some final thread of sanity or hope, or both. "I'm sorry," Mira whispered again. Then she turned the crossbow on herself. "No!" Nira screamed. Too late. The bolt took Mira in the chest, and she crumpled, dead before she hit the carriage floor. Arn started crying, the sound piercing and terrified. And Naira, with blood on her hands and death all around her, ran back to scoop her up, to get her away from Mira's body, to shield her from sights no child should ever see. Behind her, Draven was still fighting, but his movements were getting sluggish, his breathing ragged. He'd killed 3 more mercenaries, but taken 2 more wounds doing it, and his shirt was soaked red now, so much blood that Naira couldn't tell where one injury ended and another began. 4 mercenaries left, plus Castellan, who was watching from the tree line with an expression of mild interest, like this was entertainment instead of slaughter. "Enough!" Draven gasped, and his power flared again, wild and desperate. "I'm ending this." "Don't you dare shift," Nira said, even knowing he couldn't hear her over the sounds of combat. Draven's form began to shimmer, the change starting despite the damage it would cause. And that's when the remaining mercenaries made their move, coordinating in a way that spoke of extensive training. 2 went high, blades aimed at Draven's throat and chest. 2 went low, going for his legs, trying to bring him down. He couldn't block all 4, not without shifting, not without killing himself in the process. Naira saw it happening and knew with absolute certainty that Draven was about to choose death over failure, was about to burn himself out protecting them, was about to leave her alone with a baby and enemies and no path forward except grief. "No!" She screamed the word with everything she had, her ruined voice tearing itself raw, and something inside her broke open. Not breaking like damage, breaking like a dam. Power flooded through her, wild and uncontrolled, sourced from somewhere deep in her chest where the mate bond lived. It wasn't her power. Couldn't be. She'd never had power. She was broken and defective and powerless. But it was real nonetheless. It exploded out of her in a wave of pure force that sent all 4 mercenaries flying backward, their bodies hitting trees and rocks with sickening cracks. The forest went silent. Draven stood frozen, staring at her with something that looked like shock and awe and recognition. Nira stood with Aaron clutched to her chest, breathing hard, feeling the power draining away as fast as it had come, leaving her shaking and exhausted and utterly confused. "What?" she started. "The bond." Draven's voice was rough with pain and something else. "You pulled from the bond. From me. I felt it. I don't understand." Unclaimed mates can't usually access each other's power, but in extreme situations when one is dying, the bond can open completely. Let the surviving mate draw on everything to... He stopped, swaying on his feet. "You saved me. Again." Then he collapsed. Nira ran to him, Aaron still in one arm, her free hand going to his throat to find a pulse. There. Weak and fast, but there. But the blood. There was so much blood pooling beneath him, soaking into the ground. "Stay with me," Nira commanded, her voice breaking. "Don't you fucking die on me now. Not after everything. Not..." "Impressive," Castellan's voice. Naira's head snapped up. He was still standing there, calm and unbothered, like watching his mercenaries get destroyed was a minor inconvenience. "I expected the Emperor to put up a fight, but you?" His eyebrows rose. "The broken Omega? That was unexpected." "Get away from us." Naira's arms tightened around Aaron. "Or what? You'll use your newfound power?" Castellan chuckled. "You're exhausted. That little display drained you completely. You can barely stand, and I..." He drew a blade from his belt. "Am very good at killing people who can't fight back." He started walking forward. Nira looked around desperately. Draven was unconscious. The mercenaries were all dead or dying. Mira was dead. The captain and the guards were too far away, probably lost the trail or deliberately delayed. No help coming. No way out. Just her, a baby, and a dying mate against a man who'd orchestrated this entire nightmare. "You don't have to do this," Nira said, hating how her voice shook. "The conspiracy is exposed. The High Court knows everything. Killing us now won't save you." "True." Castellan kept coming, 10 feet away now. "But it will send a message that the Council is not to be trifled with, that even emperors can be replaced, and that broken Omegas who reach above their station, 5 feet, die screaming." Naira set Aaron down gently, behind Draven's body where she'd be as protected as possible. Then she straightened, facing Castellan with nothing but determination and a knife she barely knew how to use. "I survived rejection," she said quietly. "I survived assassination conspirators. I survived a rigged trial and a kidnapping and a forest full of killers. You think I'm going to let you end me now? I think you're going to die trying to stop me." Castellan's blade came up. "But I admire the spirit." He lunged. Naira tried to dodge, but she was too slow, too exhausted, too human. The blade caught her across the ribs, not deep, but deep enough, and pain exploded through her side. She stumbled, fell, rolled, came up gasping. Castellan was smiling. "That was your one chance," he said. "Next time I won't miss anything vital." Naira's vision was blurring, her side on fire, her legs shaking. This was it. She was going to die in this forest, and Arin was going to grow up without anyone who loved her, and Draven was going to wake up alone if he woke up at all, and everything she'd fought for was going to end here in the dirt and blood and hoofbeats. Distant but getting closer. The guards. Finally catching up. Castellan heard them too, his expression tightening. "Seems we're out of time." He raised his blade. "I'll make this quick." "Wait." Naira held up one hand, her voice desperate. "You wanted to send a message, right? You wanted the council's power secured?" "Yes. And?" "Then take me alive." The words hurt to say, but she forced them out. "Use me as a hostage. The Emperor will negotiate for his mate. You'll have leverage, power, a seat at the table when everything settles. Kill me and you get nothing but revenge." Castellan paused, actually considering it. "And the child? Leave her with Draven. She's no use to you dead, and she'll die if you try to move her without proper care. But me?" Naira pushed herself to her feet, swaying. "I'm valuable. Prove that the Emperor can't protect his mate, and you prove he's weak. Keep me alive, and you can bleed him for concessions. Kill me, and you're just another traitor getting executed." The hoofbeats were getting louder. Castellan looked at the forest road, at Naira, at Draven's unconscious form. Then he grabbed Naira's arm with brutal strength and hauled her toward the trees. "Smart girl," he said. "Let's see if your mate values you enough to trade his throne for your life." Naira didn't resist. Let him drag her into the forest, away from Arin and Draven and everything that mattered, because she'd bought them time, bought the guards time to find them, time for Draven to be healed, time for Arin to be safe. And if that meant becoming a hostage, becoming the weak link Castellan could exploit, so be it. She'd been called weak her entire life. Might as well use it. They were 20 yards into the trees when the guards burst into the clearing behind them. Naira heard shouting, heard commands being given, heard someone scream when they found Draven's body. She didn't look back, couldn't afford to, because Castellan's blade was at her throat now, pressing just hard enough to draw a thin line of blood. "Make a sound and I open your throat," he whispered. Naira stayed silent. They moved deeper into the forest, away from the clearing, away from safety. And Naira, bleeding and terrified and more alone than she'd ever been, started planning how to survive what came next. Because she wasn't the broken Omega anymore. She was the woman who'd faced down conspiracies and assassins and an entire corrupt system. She was the woman who'd pulled power from a mate bond that shouldn't exist. She was the woman who'd chosen to become a hostage to save the people she loved. And she was going to make Lord Castellan regret every decision that had led him to this moment. The forest swallowed them whole, and behind them, in the clearing, Draven opened his eyes to find his mate gone and his daughter crying and a choice staring him in the face that would define everything that came next. Chase Naira and risk Arin, save Arin and lose Naira, split his forces and risk losing both. His hand clenched in the bloody dirt, his chest screaming with pain, his wolf howling with rage and grief. And Draven, emperor of a broken kingdom, made the only choice he could live with. "Captain," he gasped, forcing himself to sit up despite agony that tried to drag him back under. "Take 10 guards, find Naira, track them, but do not engage until I arrive." "Your Majesty, you can't possibly—" "I'll be there." His eyes went silver, his power flooding back despite the damage it caused. "Get my daughter to safety. Get me a healer, and then prepare for war because I'm about to show Castellan what happens when you take something that belongs to me." The captain saluted and ran, barking orders. And Draven, with his daughter crying in his arms and his mate's blood on his hands, felt something inside him transform. No more restraint. No more mercy. No more pretending the throne mattered more than the people he loved. Castellan wanted a message? Draven would give him one, written in fire and blood and the screams of everyone who'd ever thought they could use his mate as a pawn. He stood, ignoring the way his vision grayed at the edges, ignoring the blood still pouring from wounds that should have killed him. Arryn quieted in his arms, those silver eyes staring up at him with absolute trust. "Your mother is the strongest person I've ever met," Draven told her, his voice rough with pain and pride and fury. "And I'm going to get her back. I promise you that. No matter what it costs, no matter who I have to kill, I'm bringing her home." In the forest, Nyra stumbled over roots and rocks, Castellan's blade never leaving her throat. And she felt it, the bond, stretching between them like a cord made of light and will and something unbreakable. Felt Draven wake, felt his rage, felt his promise. "I'm coming." Nyra's mouth curved in a smile that had nothing to do with happiness and everything to do with the predator she was becoming. "I'm counting on it," she thought back through the bond, not knowing if he could hear her but sending it anyway. "Come find me. Come bring your fury and your power and your wolf. And when you do, we're going to tear this kingdom apart and rebuild it in our image. Together." The sun set behind the trees, painting the forest in shades of blood and shadow. And the war for the throne, for justice, for a broken Omega's right to stand beside her emperor, was just beginning. Ahead, through the trees, Nyra could see lights, a camp, more mercenaries, a stronghold where Castellan planned to hole up and wait for Draven to come begging. "Welcome to your new home," Castellan said, shoving her forward. "Let's see how long it takes your mate to break." Nyra said nothing, her mind already cataloging exits, counting enemies, planning escapes, because she wasn't waiting to be rescued. She was preparing to escape. And when Draven arrived, and he would arrive, she had no doubt, she'd make sure there was a kingdom left worth saving, even if she had to burn it down and build it back up herself. The camp's gates opened, and Nyra Voss, the rejected Omega, the woman everyone had dismissed, walked into her enemy's stronghold with her head high and her eyes already plotting their destruction, because she'd learned something important in the past 3 days. She wasn't broken. She was a weapon. And it was time to show them exactly how much damage a weapon could. The stronghold was built into the mountainside like a scar. Stone walls that had seen centuries of war. Narrow windows designed for arrows rather than light. And a courtyard that smelled of rust and old blood. Castellan's mercenaries filled the space, maybe 40 of them, all armed and watching Nyra with the casual interest of men who'd learned not to underestimate their prey, but hadn't yet learned to fear her. They would. Castellan shoved her into a cell carved from the mountain itself, the door slamming shut with the finality of a coffin lid. No windows. One torch burning low on the wall, stone floor cold enough to leach heat through her boots. "The Emperor will come for you," Castellan said through the barred window in the door. "Probably within hours, and when he does, we'll be ready. We'll bleed him, break him, make him watch while we—" He stopped, smiled. "Well, you'll see." His footsteps faded. Nyra waited until she couldn't hear them anymore, then moved to examine the cell. The walls were solid stone, no cracks wide enough to exploit. The door was reinforced iron, the lock sophisticated enough that picking it would require tools she didn't have. The torch was bolted to the wall, deliberately out of reach. Someone had planned this cell for holding dangerous prisoners. Good thing Nyra had stopped thinking of herself as a prisoner. She sat against the far wall, closed her eyes, and reached for the bond. It was there, thrumming like a second heartbeat, stretched thin by distance but unbroken. She could feel Draven on the other end, his pain, his fury, his absolute determination, and something else. Movement. He was coming, fast, probably too fast for his injuries, but that had never stopped him before. Nyra sent feeling down the bond, not words, but emotion. "I'm alive. I'm fighting. Come when you're ready, but come smart." She didn't know if he could feel it the way she felt him, but the bond pulsed with what might have been acknowledgement, or might have been a promise of violence. Either worked. Nyra opened her eyes and started cataloging everything in the cell that could be weaponized. The torch bracket. If she could loosen it, the metal could be sharpened. Her boots had metal eyelets that could be pulled free and used as cutting tools. The hem of her dress had been stitched with wire to hold its shape, wire that could be unraveled, and the door opened. A woman entered, older than the mercenaries outside, with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much cruelty to be surprised by more. She carried a tray with bread and water. "Eat," she said, her voice rough with disuse. "Lord Castellan wants you alive and coherent when the Emperor arrives." Nira didn't move toward the tray. "What's your name?" The woman blinked, surprised by the question. "Vera?" "Not the attorney, different Vera." "Yes, I'm the cook. Nothing important." "Everyone's important." Nira shifted slightly, making herself less threatening. "How long have you worked for Castellan?" 10 years? Why?" "Because you look tired and sad, and like maybe you didn't sign up for whatever this is." Nira gestured at the cell. "Kidnapping, treason, using a baby as bait." Vera's face tightened. "I just cook. What they do with the food after isn't my concern. Except it is. Because when this is over, when the Emperor tears this place apart looking for me, everyone inside will be held accountable. Cooks included." Nira's voice softened. "Unless they can prove they helped, unless they did something to show they weren't part of it. I can't. I have nowhere else to go, no other work. If I betray Lord Castellan, he's already dead. He just doesn't know it yet." Nira said it with absolute certainty. "The only question is whether you go down with him or walk away with a pardon and a recommendation for employment in the palace kitchens." Vera stared at her. "You can't promise that." "No, but the Emperor can, and he will, for anyone who helps me." Nira leaned forward. "I need information. How many guards? What's the patrol rotation? Where's the armory?" "I don't know about guards and patrols. I'm just—" "You're someone who's survived 10 years in a mercenary stronghold by being observant and smart." Nira's eyes were steady. "You know more than you're saying. The question is whether you're brave enough to use it." Vera's hands twisted in her apron, her face a war between fear and something that might have been hope. 43 mercenaries, she said finally, the words tumbling out fast like she was afraid she'd stop if she slowed down. Plus Lord Castellan and his 3 personal guards. Patrols change every 4 hours. The armory is in the east wing, 2nd floor, and there's— She stopped, swallowed. "There's a passage, a secret one, built into the mountain for escapes. It opens behind the fireplace in the main hall." Nira's pulse quickened. "Where does it lead?" "To a cave system about half a mile north. Exits near the river." Vera's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "But it's trapped. Pressure plates, hidden blades, things meant to kill anyone who doesn't know the safe path." "Do you know the safe path?" "I've seen Lord Castellan use it twice. I remember most of the sequence." "Most?" Vera's face crumpled. "I'm sorry, it's the best I can—" "It's perfect." Nira stood, moving to the door. "When the Emperor arrives, there's going to be chaos. Fighting, probably fire. Use that chaos to get out. Take the passage if you can, the front gate if you can't. Either way, run. And when you're clear, find the royal guards and tell them about the passage. Tell them Nira sent you. Understand?" "Why are you helping me?" "Because someone helped me once when they didn't have to. And because I'm tired of watching people get crushed by systems that use them up and throw them away." Nira's smile was grim. "Now go, before someone notices you've been here too long." Vera left, and Nira sat back down, her mind racing. A secret passage. Trapped, but navigable. That was something. Not much, but something. She pulled at the hem of her dress, working the wire free with patient, methodical movements. It was slow work, her fingers clumsy from cold and the wound in her side throbbing with each breath. But pain was familiar, pain was manageable. She'd survived worse. An hour later, she had 3 feet of wire coiled in her palm and a plan forming in her mind. Not escape, not yet, but preparation. So when the moment came, when Draven arrived and everything went to hell, she'd be ready. The bond pulsed again, stronger this time, closer. Nira closed her eyes and sent back feeling. "Almost there, be ready." Then she settled in to wait, the wire hidden in her sleeve, her body coiled like a spring. And when heavy footsteps approached her cell hours later, when the door swung open to reveal Castellan flanked by 2 guards, Nira looked up at them with eyes that had stopped being prey and started being predator. "He's here, isn't he?" she said, Castellan's smile was sharp. Riding up the mountain road with 50 guards at his back, demanding your release, threatening to burn this place to bedrock if I don't comply. You should comply. Should I? Castellan gestured, and the guards hauled Naira to her feet, their grips bruising on her arms. Or should I use you to teach the great Emperor Draven Kalor a lesson in humility? They dragged her through the stronghold, past mercenaries preparing for battle, past weapons being distributed and defensive positions being fortified. The main hall was massive, with a fireplace big enough to roast a pig, and tapestries that depicted battles from wars Nira didn't recognize. And there, barely visible behind the tapestries, the outline of the hidden door Vera had mentioned. Castellan positioned Naira in the center of the hall, her arms held by guards, a blade at her throat. When he comes through that door, Castellan said, he'll see you bleeding, see you helpless, see exactly what happens to emperors who forget their place. And then what? Naira's voice was steady, despite the blade's pressure. You kill me, and he slaughters everyone here? You kill him and the kingdom tears itself apart? You've already lost, Castellan. You just haven't admitted it yet. I've won. Castellan's voice was certain. Because even if he kills me, even if he destroys this entire stronghold, the council remains. The system remains. And systems always outlast individuals. Always. Maybe, Naira met his eyes, or maybe the system dies today. The main doors exploded inward. Not opened, not unlocked. Exploded. Wood and iron burst apart like they'd been hit by a battering ram made of pure force, and through the smoke and debris walked Draven Kalor. He was in wolf form, massive and black and radiating power that made the air itself feel electric. His silver eyes found Naira across the hall, and the relief that flooded the bond was so intense it stole her breath. Then those eyes shifted to Castellan, and the relief became something else entirely. Hunger. The wolf stalked forward, each step deliberate, muscles rippling under midnight fur. Behind him, royal guards poured through the shattered entrance, engaging the mercenaries in combat that was brutal and efficient. But Draven ignored all of it. His focus was absolute, singular. Castellan. Impressive entrance, Castellan called out, trying to project confidence despite the way his hand shook on his sword. But you're still injured, still healing. You think you can take me and 40 mercenaries in your condition? The wolf's lips pulled back, revealing teeth like daggers. I'll take that as a yes. Castellan's blade pressed harder against Nira's throat. But here's the problem. You move, she dies. You shift back, you're vulnerable, and she dies. You do nothing. Well, eventually she dies anyway. So what's your play, Your Majesty? How do you save your mate when every option ends in her blood? Nira felt the wire in her sleeve, felt the plan forming, felt the bond thrumming with trust and understanding. On 3, she sent down the connection, praying he could hear her, praying the bond was strong enough. 1, 2, 3. Naira dropped, her full weight going limp, pulling the guards holding her off balance. The blade at her throat sliced skin, but not deep, not fatal. And Draven moved. He was across the hall in a heartbeat, massive jaws closing around Castellan's sword arm before the man could adjust his aim. Bone crunched. Castellan screamed. The sword clattered to the floor. Naira yanked the wire from her sleeve and whipped it across the nearest guard's face, the metal cutting deep. He stumbled back, hands going to his ruined eyes, and Naira was already moving, grabbing his dropped weapon, driving it into the second guard's throat before he could react. The hall descended into chaos. Mercenaries poured in from side doors, attacking the royal guards with desperate ferocity. Steel rang against steel. Men screamed. Blood painted the stone floor in spreading pools. And in the center of it all, Draven and Castellan faced each other. Alpha versus traitor, emperor versus conspiracy. Castellan had drawn a dagger with his remaining hand, was circling with the wary movements of someone who knew he was outmatched but had nothing left to lose. You can kill me, Castellan panted, but you can't kill the council, can't kill every noble who thinks you're weak for choosing her, can't kill the system that will grind her down the moment you look away. Draven shifted. The transformation was violent, bones reshaping with sounds that made Naira's stomach turn, fur receding into skin. He rose in human form, naked and covered in blood, both his and others, his wounds still visible but his eyes burning with absolute determination. Watch me, he said. and he tore Castellan apart, not with claws or teeth, with hands, with the methodical brutality of an alpha who'd been pushed past the point of mercy and found something colder waiting on the other side. When it was over, when Castellan's body lay broken and still, Draven turned to face the remaining mercenaries. They took one look at his blood-soaked form, at the bodies scattered around him, at the Emperor who'd just killed their leader with his bare hands. And they ran, the ones who could still walk anyway. The royal guards let them go, too exhausted to chase, too relieved to care. Draven crossed to Nyra, his hands finding her face, checking her for injuries with touches that were gentle despite the violence still humming through him. "You're hurt," he said, his thumb brushing the cut on her throat. "I'm alive." Nyra's hands covered his, grounding them both. "We're both alive, that's what matters. I failed you." The words came out raw. "I let them take you. I wasn't fast enough, strong enough. You came for me." Nyra cut him off. "That's what matters. Not how fast. Not how perfect. You came." Draven pulled her against his chest, holding her like she might disappear if he loosened his grip even slightly. And Nyra, standing in a hall full of bodies with blood soaking into her dress and exhaustion pulling at every muscle, felt something inside her chest finally settle. Safe. She was safe. They were safe. "Your daughter?" she whispered against his shoulder. "With the healer. Protected. Waiting for her mother to come home." "I'm not her mother." "Yes." Draven pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "You are. By choice. By love. By every night you spent feeding her, and every moment you risked your life to protect her. Blood doesn't make family. This does." He kissed her, and it tasted like copper and desperation and promises finally kept. When they pulled apart, the captain was approaching, her face grim. "Your Majesty, we've secured the stronghold, found documents in Castellan's chambers, evidence of the conspiracy, names, payments, everything we need to dismantle the council." "Good." Draven's voice was flat. "Arrest everyone named. I don't care about rank or title. They betrayed the throne. They answer for it. And the Omega?" The captain's eyes flicked to Nyra. "What's her status?" "Empress." The word came out absolute. "Effective immediately. Anyone who has a problem with that can join Castellan in the afterlife." Silence fell across the hall. Then slowly, the captain dropped to one knee. "Your Majesty, Your Highness." The other guards followed one by one until everyone still standing was kneeling. Nyra looked at Draven, panic rising. I'm not ready to be." "Neither was I," when they put the crown on my head. His hand found hers, fingers lacing together. "But we'll figure it out, together. The council will never accept." "There is no council anymore. Not the old one." Draven's smile was sharp. "We're building something new, something that doesn't crush people for being different, something where a mute Omega can stand beside her Emperor and no one questions her right to be there." "That's a fantasy." "Then let's make it real." The palace felt different when they returned. Lighter, maybe. Or maybe that was just Nyra's perception, seeing it now as someone who belonged instead of someone who'd been tolerated. Arin was waiting in the royal nursery, her cries echoing down the corridor before Nyra even reached the door. But the moment Nyra picked her up, the moment that small body settled against her chest, the crying stopped. Like she'd been waiting, like she'd known her mother would come. "Hey, baby girl," Nyra whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I left you. But I'm here now. I'm here, and I'm not leaving again. I promise." Arin's tiny hand grabbed Nyra's finger, holding tight. And Nyra, standing in a palace that had once been the site of her greatest humiliation, felt tears slide down her face for the first time since the choosing. Not tears of pain, tears of something that felt dangerously close to happiness. Draven appeared in the doorway, cleaned up now, wearing clothes and bandages and looking marginally less like he'd just walked out of a war zone. "The healer says my injuries will heal in a few days," he said. "Apparently nearly dying twice in 1 week is bad for the body." "Who knew?" Nyra laughed, the sound rough and unexpected. "You're an idiot who loves you." He moved to stand beside her, looking down at Arin. "Both of you. You barely know me. I know you pulled power from a bond that shouldn't have worked yet to save my life. I know you became a hostage to protect my daughter. I know you stared down Castellan without flinching, even with a blade at your throat. His hand cupped her face. I know enough, and I want to know everything else, every scar, every fear, every dream you've never said out loud. I want all of it. That could take a while. Good thing we have the rest of our lives. They stood there, the three of them, while the palace settled around them and the sun set over a kingdom that was about to change in ways no one had anticipated. The executions happened at dawn. Naira didn't watch. She'd seen enough death to last a lifetime, and there was no satisfaction in watching the council members who'd conspired against them swing from the gallows. Justice, maybe, but not satisfaction. Draven came to find her afterward, his face drawn, but his eyes clear. It's done, he said simply. All of them? Everyone who was directly involved. The rest, the ones who knew but didn't act, are stripped of titles and exiled. The council is being reformed with representatives from every pack, every region. No more concentrated power, no more old families controlling everything. They'll fight you on that. Let them. Draven's jaw set. I'm done playing by rules designed to keep people in their place. From now on, competence matters. Character matters, not bloodlines. Nira moved to the window, looking out over the palace grounds where preparations were underway for something the servants kept calling the Empress ceremony. I don't know how to be Empress, she said quietly. Neither did the last three. They just faked it better. Draven came to stand beside her. You'll learn. We both will. What about the bond? We never completed it, never did the formal claiming. We can. Tonight, if you want. Or tomorrow. Or next year. The bond exists whether we formalize it or not. He turned to face her. But I'd like to, if you're willing. I'd like to stand in front of everyone and claim you as mine. Prove to every bastard who said you weren't good enough that they were wrong. That you're not just good enough, you're perfect. I'm not perfect. I'm broken and scarred and I can barely speak and you're a survivor. Draven's hands found her shoulders. You're someone who looked at impossible odds and won anyway. You're the woman I want beside me when everything goes to hell because I know you won't break, won't run, won't quit. His voice dropped. You're everything I didn't know I needed and more than I deserve. Nira looked at him. This emperor who'd chosen her over his throne, who'd bled for her, who'd promised to burn the kingdom down if that's what it took to keep her safe. Okay, she said. Okay? Claim me. Tonight. In front of everyone. Make it impossible for them to pretend I don't belong. Draven's smile was blinding. With pleasure. Bam. The ceremony happened in the same great hall where Naira had been rejected. She walked in wearing white this time, simple and elegant, her hair loose around her shoulders, and her throat bare except for a single silver chain that marked her as royal. The hall was packed, every important person in the kingdom crammed into the space, watching with expressions that ranged from curious to hostile to cautiously approving. And standing at the far end, waiting for her, was Draven. He wore formal robes, black and silver, the crown of the emperor heavy on his head, but his eyes soft when they found hers. Naira walked toward him, past the same people who'd watched her humiliation, past the spot where Kaelin had stood to reject her. But this time she wasn't walking in shame. This time she was walking in triumph. When she reached Draven, he took her hands in his grip warm and steady. Nira Voss, he said, his voice carrying across the hall. I claim you as my mate, my empress, my equal in all things. I bind my life to yours, my power to yours, my future to yours. Do you accept? I do. The bond flared to life, not snapping into place because it had always been there, but completing like the final piece of a puzzle sliding home. Power flooded through Naira, shared power, Draven's strength mixing with something that had always been hers but buried too deep to reach. And when she opened her eyes, they were glowing silver. The hall gasped. Because an Omega's eyes didn't glow. Couldn't glow. That was alpha territory. A sign of dominant power. Except Naira's eyes were burning like stars, bright enough to make people look away, bright enough to prove that every assumption about what she could or couldn't be was wrong. I claim you as my mate, Nira said, and her voice came out clear and strong, The damage somehow healed or bypassed by the power flooding through her. My emperor, my partner, I bind my life to yours, my strength to yours, my future to yours. And I promise, she raised her voice, making sure everyone heard, that anyone who tries to hurt you, to undermine you, to use our bond as a weakness, will answer to me. The threat was clear. The promise was absolute. And when Draven kissed her, sealing the bond in front of witnesses and gods and the entire kingdom, Nira felt something she hadn't felt in years. Belonging. 3 months later, Nira stood in the same courtyard where she'd first saved Draven's life, watching Aaron take her first steps. The baby girl was determined, her face scrunched with concentration, her tiny hands reaching for Nira like she was the center of the universe. "Come on," Nira encouraged. "You can do it. Just a few more steps." Aaron wobbled, nearly fell, caught herself, and lunged forward. Nira caught her, laughing, pulling her close, while Aaron shrieked with delight. "She's got your stubbornness," Draven said from the doorway, "and your complete inability to quit even when it's probably smarter to stop." Nira looked up at him. "We're doomed." "Completely." He moved to sit beside her, Aaron immediately climbing into his lap. "The council met today. The new one." "How bad?" "Better than expected. They actually listened when I proposed expanding healthcare to the outer territories. No one threatened to quit or called it a waste of resources." Progress. Slow progress. But yes, Draven's hand found hers. "We're changing things, one law at a time, one mind at a time. It won't happen overnight." Nothing worth doing ever does. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Aaron play, while the palace bustled around them with the business of running a kingdom that was slowly, painfully becoming something better. A servant approached, bowing. "Your Highness, there's someone at the gates requesting an audience." Nira's eyebrows rose. "Who?" "Kalen Virex." The name landed like a stone in still water. Nira and Draven exchanged glances. "Show him to the throne room," Nira said, standing and handing Aaron to Draven. "I'll be there in 5 minutes." When she entered the throne room, Kalen was standing in the center, looking smaller somehow than she remembered, diminished. His clothes were plain, his posture careful, and his eyes, when they met hers, held something that might have been shame. "Nira?" He inclined his head. "Your Highness." "Kalen." She didn't sit on the throne, didn't use the height advantage, just stood there letting him see her as she was now, empress, mate, mother. "What do you want?" "To apologize." The words came out rough like they hurt. "For what I did, for what I said, for He stopped, swallowed. "For all of it." "Why now? It's been months." "Because I've been thinking about that night, about what I did to you." His voice dropped. "About what happened after, the coup attempt, Castellan's conspiracy. And I realized, if I hadn't rejected you, if you hadn't been pushed to the edges, none of it would have unfolded the way it did. You wouldn't have been in that forest, wouldn't have saved the Emperor, wouldn't have exposed the conspiracy." "So you're apologizing because I succeeded?" Nira's voice was flat. "I'm apologizing because I was wrong." Kalen met her eyes. "You weren't defective. You weren't broken. You were everything an Omega should be, strong, resourceful, capable. And I couldn't see it because I was too busy looking at what you'd lost instead of what you still had. That's not an apology. That's an excuse. You're right." Kalen's shoulders sagged. "I'm sorry, Nira, for hurting you, for humiliating you, for making you feel like you were less than everyone else when you were always more. I'm sorry, and I don't expect forgiveness. I needed you to hear it, needed to say it out loud." Nira studied him for a long moment. This man who'd once been her entire future, who'd represented everything she thought she'd never have, and felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no lingering pain, just indifference. "I forgive you," she said, and watched his eyes widen in shock. "Not because you deserve it, not because your apology was good enough, but because carrying anger at you takes energy I don't want to spend anymore. So yes, you're forgiven. Now leave that." "Nira?" "I said leave, Kalen. We're done. We were done the moment you called me defective. This doesn't change that. It just means I'm not interested in making you suffer for it anymore." He left, and Nira stood alone in the throne room, feeling lighter than she had in years. Draven appeared in the doorway, having clearly been listening. "You handled that well," he said. "I handled it honestly." Nira moved to his side. "He doesn't matter anymore. None of them do. The only thing that matters is what we're building here." "And what are we building?" "A kingdom where the next girl like me doesn't have to nearly die to prove she's worth something." Nira's voice was fierce. "A place where being different isn't the same as being broken, where power comes from what you do, not who you were born as. That's going to take decades. Good thing we're just getting started." They stood together, Emperor and Empress, looking out over a kingdom that was changing because they'd refused to accept it the way it was. And in the nursery, Erin slept peacefully, dreaming baby dreams of a future where her mother's scars were badges of honor and her father's love was the foundation of a new world. A world where rejection didn't mean ending, it meant beginning. And where the girl they'd thrown away had risen to prove that sometimes the best queens are forged in the fires that were supposed to destroy them. 5 years later, Nira stood at the podium in the Grand Assembly Hall, looking out over representatives from every pack in the kingdom. Her voice was clear now, strong, the damage healed by bond magic and sheer determined practice. "The Healthcare Equity Act passes," she announced, and watched relief flood across faces in the crowd. "Effective immediately, all packs will have access to healers regardless of rank or income. No more children dying because their parents couldn't afford treatment. No more Omegas suffering in silence because care was reserved for Alphas." Applause erupted, genuine and loud. Draven watched from his throne, pride written across his face. After the session ended, after the representatives had filed out and the hall had emptied, Nira found him waiting. 5 years, he said. 5 years of fighting for every inch of progress. Was it worth it? "Ask me that again when the first reports come in of lives saved." Nira settled beside him. "But yes, it was worth it. Even the hard parts? The council members who resigned rather than work with a mute empress? The assassination attempts? The endless meetings and negotiations and compromises? Especially the hard parts." Nira's hand found his. "Because they proved we were right. Proved that change is possible when you refuse to quit." Footsteps echoed in the hall, and Arin appeared, no longer a baby, but a bright, fierce 5-year-old with her father's silver eyes and her mother's absolute determination. "Mama!" She ran forward. "Father said I could sit in on the next council meeting if you said yes." "Did he now?" Nira raised an eyebrow at Draven. She asked very persuasively. "I'm going to be Empress someday," Arin said with the confidence of someone who'd never been told she couldn't be anything. "I should know how it works." "You're 5. So? You were nobody and you became Empress. I'm already somebody. I should be even better at it." Nira laughed, the sound free and unguarded. "You can sit in, but you have to be quiet and pay attention. I'm always quiet. You're never quiet." "Fine, I'll try to be quiet." Arin ran off, probably to terrorize the palace staff with her enthusiasm, and Nira watched her go with a mother's pride and terror. "She's going to change the world," Draven said. "She already is." Nira stood, pulling him up with her. "Come on, we have a kingdom to run and a daughter to keep from accidentally starting a revolution before dinner. Just another day in paradise. Just another day being us." They walked through the palace hand in hand, past portraits of past emperors and empresses, past servants who bowed with genuine respect instead of obligation, past the future they were building one decision at a time. And somewhere in the distance, in a cottage at the edge of pack territory that had been converted into a healing center for Omegas recovering from abuse, a young woman opened the door for the first time in months and stepped into sunlight. Because Nira Voss had looked at her own scars and decided that suffering in silence wasn't strength, speaking up was, fighting back was, surviving was, and thriving, despite everything the world threw at you, was the greatest victory of all. The girl they'd called defective had become an empress. The Omega they'd rejected had reformed a kingdom. The woman they'd tried to break had risen stronger than anyone imagined possible. And she was just getting started.